Call the 7 p.m. public hearing to order. Application on behalf of 527 Prospect LLC, owner of 527 Prospect Avenue, to amendment SDD number 123 to permit an approximately 984 square foot two-story addition for expanded office space. Associated landscaping, parking, and drainage improvements are proposed. Roll call, Ms. LeBreau.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan is absent. Mr. Sweeney.
Here.
Mr. Winograd. Here. Mr. Williams.
Here.
And we have Mr. Stafford sitting in for Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. This is a reminder regarding the alternates sitting for regular members. At the last public hearing on this topic, dated May 28th, 2 counselors were absent, Sweeney and Dodge. Since then, both counselors have read the court transcript to this public hearing are in attendance. Counselor Kerrigan is absent, but we have an alternate Stafford here who is in attendance, who was also in attendance on May 28th. We will start with an updated presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, although it looks very much like afternoon still, which is lovely. Mayor Cantor, members of the Town Council, town staff, thank you again for the opportunity to present this evening. I think it was a good idea that we tabled last time. I'm Bill Crow with Roja Nassau and Hartford, the applicant's counsel. And this time I've come with a full panoply of folks that can answer all of your questions in detail, which unfortunately I wasn't able to do last time. So I've got with us tonight the engineer for the project, Jim Cassidy, the architect for the project, Kurt Boswick, and I've got all 3 principals of the law firm / applicant with us this evening, including Mike Walsh, who would like to give a brief presentation, and then we've got our crew that can answer in detail your questions. In light of some of the issues that were raised in the last hearing, I just wanted to reiterate that we have, as the applicant, satisfied the requirements of town staff, met with planning and zoning, met with design review. We're very interested in moving forward with this project, of course, with your blessing, because we can't without. And in the district that we're in, it is discretionary. And we pointed out last time, which is the obvious relief we're looking for. In fact, if you could characterize it as looking for relief, would be the side yard and not adding 1 additional on-site parking space. I would point out that it is within your discretion to approve the application, and whether you look at it as giving us relief from the strict application of what otherwise would be the requirements in an RO zone, or you're looking at this within this district as something that's your purview to act upon. We feel that we have worked hard to have this thing both work for ourselves as a business, because we're out of room, and work for our neighbors, and work for the neighborhood, and work for the town. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Walsh, a principal with the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor and members of the Town Council. Thank you for listening to us tonight. I'm Mike Walsh, and I'm a partner in the Walsh Woodard Law Firm. And we're here before you, as our attorneys just said. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Dodge had something, I don't know. What's your?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I just did want to disclose
This is actually the first time this has ever happened since I've been on council that I do know Mr. Walsh. We both clerked for the same judge, and we've seen each other on social occasions, mostly reunions, that sort of thing. But I just want to disclose that I don't think it would impact at all my ability to participate in this or create any kind of a conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge.
Thank you. How are you, Dallas?
Proceed, sorry.
When we purchased 527 Prospect, it had been vacant for a significant period of time. It was pretty run down. It really wasn't habitable inside. And we took it over, and we invested $300,000 in renovating it. We stripped it down to the studs, new roof, new siding, just about new everything inside, walls, electrical, air conditioning, paint, carpets, everything you can imagine, because it was important to us. And we love the building, and we love the neighborhood. It's important to us to keep it in beautiful condition, which is what we're trying to do. We're seeking the expansion because our business needs require it, quite candidly. We want to expand the building, though, in a way that is respectful and contextual to the surrounding neighborhood. We have an architect. He's assured us that this small addition, it's a 900-foot addition, I know you all have seen the plans, that it will blend in, that it will look good. We want it to look good. And that it's appropriate for the neighborhood. We try to keep the lawn in immaculate condition. We always keep the sidewalks plowed, and that's important to us. We like the neighborhood. We try to keep our house looking as good as we can. We want the neighborhood to be clean. We want it to be safe. We have clients that take the bus from Farmington Avenue and walk down to our building. So it's important to us for it to be a nice area. I want to address a couple issues that came up at the last meeting. We did have a neighborhood meeting in April. We did send notice of that meeting to everybody in the contiguous block behind our house going into West Hartford. It's my understanding that Mr. Wigan, our next door neighbor, showed up and said that he did not get notice of the meeting. I apologize for that. I can assure you it was sent. I don't know why he didn't receive it. But I will say that I've spoken to Mr. Wigan about this addition. He knew about the addition. This was in no way something we were trying to slip by him. There was a sign on the front of our yard for the past several weeks. So this is not something that was unknown to him. And I want to make that clear. I would note, too, I think it's important for the town council to know that Mr. Wigan, the neighbor who was complaining, he doesn't live in the property next door to us. He maintains a business in that property. I'm not exactly sure how to characterize it. I think it's some kind of halfway house or transitional living facility. I don't want to be disrespectful in any way, but that's the type of house it is. And I think it's always going to be a business from the structure of the property. So it's not like it's a residential facility next door. And I also want to note that I've been friendly with Ed over the years. I hope that after this is done, we continue to be friendly. Ed's been a good neighbor, and I hope that it continues that way. I'd like to address the issue of parking, because I know that has come up in the previous meetings. At most, we have 10 employees at any one time in our building. But I've got to tell you, we hardly ever have 10 employees there. We're litigators. We're usually in court. We're usually at depositions. Frequently, I'm traveling for medical malpractice cases. I do that at least twice a month. So, yes, that's the total number, but to say that they're always there is inaccurate. We also have 2 senior paralegals now that are working remotely from home. We've set up them with computers, and it's working very well. One is there 5 days a week. One is at our home about 2 days a week. So that also detracts from the total number of people in that building at any one time. Parking for us has never been an issue on Prospect Avenue. If you went to Farmington Avenue and you drove down Prospect to Park Road, you'd see that there's a lot of cars parked on Prospect Avenue. It's a street that allows parking. It's always been that way. We're not changing the character of the parking situation in any way on Prospect Avenue. That's a street that allows parking. That's one of the things that attracted us to the building when we bought it. If anything, the traffic is safer now. There was recently a stop sign put in at the corner of Prospect and Warrenton, and as a result of that, the traffic in front of our property, at least heading in the direction towards the stop sign, really is going very slowly. So it's not a traffic situation. We always park on the West Hartford side. I know there was a neighbor that came from the Hartford side of Prospect Avenue at the last meeting. I can assure you we never park in front of her building. We're always on our side of the street. So to the extent we are using spaces, and we are using spaces on the street, there's no question. We do have employees that park on the street. It's a street that allows parking, and I don't really think we're changing the character of that street in any way. So in conclusion, we are seeking a concession with regards to the setback requirement on the yard that is on the south of the building that abuts Mr. Wagon's property. There is a large side yard in that area. If you compare how far our buildings will be to the other buildings on the street in terms of the location in between, again, we're not changing the character in any way. If anything, this is more space than what most of the other buildings have between them. So we'd respectfully ask that you'd give consideration to our request for this small expansion. It is a small expansion. It's 900 square feet. We love the area. We're committed to the neighborhood. We want to keep our property in excellent condition. It's important to us. I'm sure it's important to all of you that we do that. Understandably, I understand in your role, you have to weigh equities here because you're going to hear probably some valid complaints from other people who come up here. So you kind of have to weigh the equities. But we'd respectfully submit that what we're doing when weighed against the complaints, what we're doing is justified. It's improving the neighborhood. We're doing a small increase to our business, what is necessary for our business, and it's something that's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Is there any more part to the presentation, or should we go to the sign-up sheet?
Is this one okay? Okay, good evening. For the record, my name is Jim Cassidy. I'm a professional engineer and principal with the firm of Halsey, Pearson & Cassidy. First question I'd ask is, I have some maps and some photos on boards, but I also have them in video form. If you prefer me to use your video system, whatever is more easy for the council to see.
Video would be fine.
Let me just-
It's a little bright out, but we'll see what we can do.
Sorry. Or switch to drop the screen, or? Can you see it? Okay, again, for the record, my name is Jim Cassidy. I'm a professional engineer and principal with the firm of Halsey, Pearson and Cassidy. Justin Packard from my office was before you last month, and I think he gave the technical presentation of what we're looking to do. I just wanted to go through quickly the site plan. What I've done at this point is basically I've taken the site plan. We overlaid it on an aerial photo from Google Earth. The purpose for doing this is to kind of give you a context of what we have for an existing building. So the area that's right in here is the existing building. You'll see an area off to the side here that's crosshatched in yellow. That's the existing addition that's being removed for this new 900 square foot addition. It should be noted, you'll see the brown area underneath it. This area in here, that brown area is the new addition. We say the footprint of that addition is 640 square feet. It's been noted that the overall addition is 900 square feet because it's a two-story structure and there is a large stairwell in it that deducts a good portion of the area. So just so everyone understands the square footage and how all that works out. The gray area to the back, this is the existing parking area consisting of 7 parking spaces, 1 being handicap in this location here. We were proposing 1 space up in the front. When we went to DRAC, they asked that we eliminate it and request a waiver from the town council as part of it. So per the zoning regulations, we need a total of 8 spaces. We're asking for relief of that 1 space that was up front, so we have the 7 spaces. Ultimately, by the time we're done with the addition, from the existing corner of the building to the property line, we have 19.5 feet. When we're done with the addition, we'll be at 8.9 feet. So there is a reduction. So what we're asking for relief of is the side yard setback. In the zone, the side yard setback requirement is half the building height. This building height is 28 feet, so therefore the side yard setback is 14. We're asking relief to go down to the 8.9. Then off to the south, you can see the existing 2-story structure owned by Ed Wiegand. And this is the structure that I believe is used as either a group home or some type of use. Ultimately, we'll have about 30 feet between the 2 structures when we're said and done with this proposed expansion. I have some architectural elevations. Kurt Bostwick, the architect's with us this evening also to give you an explanation of what the proposed addition will look like. But what I also wanted to bring up is this is an existing street view photo of our property. This property here would be the 527 Prospect Avenue. This is the 1-story addition that would be coming down and that we'd be installing the new addition in its place. Then off to the left is the 521. But what the reason I wanted to bring this photo is to show that this existing vegetation that sits between the 2 properties, we're proposing to keep our portion. So you can see that there is some, from the street side, there's some substantial amount of screening that be remained in place. Also wanted to reference, if you take a look at the yard, I think this is a good picture to show how the property is maintained. The lawn is immaculate, and the landscaping is all kept up. In addition to, you can see there's a couple cars and actually a third one beyond this that are already parking along the street, which is not uncommon for this area. And it was mentioned by Mr. Walsh, they do use the parking on Prospect. It's not uncommon for the area. I've been to this building several times. There are 7 spaces in the back. Basically what they request to happen is that their employees park out along the road, so the parking in the back is free for customers and clients that are coming in. So anytime I've gone to this facility, I've not really had a problem. In addition to, as Mr. Walsh had mentioned, they may have 10 employees. They may be looking for expansion, but based upon their type of business, the majority of the time, they're out at client's office and deposition in court. So they're not always here. And again, I always find there's not really an issue with parking when I go to this facility. I also wanted to bring up, I guess there was a comment last time that this proposal is out of the context of the neighborhood. So what we did is we took a look at some sites up to the north of this site. The first one would be at 571 Prospect Avenue. This is the Frontier facility. It's a larger building, but it is a larger colonial type structure. In this particular facility, for the lot, you would find that on either side, they're about 5 feet to the property line. So they're about half what we're looking for the side yard setbacks. In addition to, if I continue up the road, this photo here is at 339 Prospect Avenue. On this one, they're actually about the same distance. We're scaling about 9 and 9 feet to the side property lines. This particular building is presently used as an insurance office, so it's a similar type use, similar size piece of property. But just again, tell you, it's not out of place compared to other sites on the road. And then continuing up to the north, this is at 643 Prospect Avenue. One side of this is actually only 2 feet off. The driveway side is actually 27 feet off. So once again, it's actually a lot closer on the one side than we're looking to have. So I just wanted to bring those slides up again. I don't want to go through all the technical nature. We've been through that with your planning department and also with engineering. From my understanding, we have addressed all those comments at this point. My thought is that ultimately we're looking at an addition on the ground that's about 640 square feet, less than a third of the size of the existing structure. We've done pretty extensive amount of storm drainage design to ensure there's no impacts such as drainage. In addition to, I think the parking, the way the use is out there, it's sufficient for this site. So with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation. And Kirk, I don't know if you want to get up and talk anything about the building design. Sure, we can go back to yours.
My name is Kirk Bostwick. I'm principal with Bostwick Architects from Rocky Hill. I have worked on the original design back in 2011, 2012. And with this addition, the charge was to try to keep it as small and as compact as possible. The problem I had is I had to get an egress stair in there. That egress stair is 150 square feet on each level. So of the 900, 1/3 is donated to a stair. It's not to offices or cubicles. And you can see that in the middle two plans, the first and second floor. The other thing is I want to point out is that in connecting the existing building to the addition, I'm relocating personnel from inside the building into the addition to be able to get access from one area to the other. So it's not like I'm adding a great deal of increase in personnel. I'm also replacing the office that is presently the one-story addition with a single office on the first floor with paralegals outside of his office. So I just wanted to point out that it's not a total increase of 600 square feet for new personnel. There's maybe 2 or 3 people that would be added into this scenario. The other thing is the fire code says that I can't have more than 10 people in this building without that additional means of egress. So I have to have that stair in there for this to even work. So that was my controlling factor, is how to get that in and keep it to a minimal width.
Thank you. So anything further from the applicant? And I don't know, I think we'll have the public comment, and unless people have questions prior to the public comment or maybe after.
No, I think, Mayor Cantor, that we're done with our presentation. We're, of course, here to answer questions, and we would like to reserve the right to have at it again after the public comment, if necessary.
Thank you. And I would recommend, unless anybody feels the urge to go to ask questions now of the applicant. Okay, so would you like, I think we'll put the screen up for now and pull it down if anyone has questions. The first person that has signed up is Jean Fletcher. Make sure you state your name and address for the record. And the second is Edward, is it Wigan? And we will, if there's anybody else that wants to speak, you can speak after them. So first we'll have Jean Fletcher.
I was here at the last meeting. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. I'm from my name is Jean Fletcher. I'm at 530 Prospect Avenue in Hartford. And what I've
Well,
heard...
we just need to make a motion to suspend the
Oh,
rules to
sorry.
accept you to speak because you're not a West Hartford resident. I make a motion to suspend, to allow Ms. Fletcher to speak. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. My concern, which I explained last time, is really about the parking, and we have different opinions about where the employees park, and so we have different opinions. I also noted tonight that there was focus on how the changes fit into the existing footprint, landscape of the street relative to the West Hartford side of Prospect. So living on the Hartford side, we have single-family, two-family residences, and we live there. And I think that's very important difference than coming in to work and then leaving and going home to stay somewhere else. Now, I appreciate your concern about the property, the money you've invested in it, and it looks really nice. I am concerned still about the parking. I mean, the landscapers park in front of our houses when they come to do the work, and that's a lot of equipment. So that's where my concern is. I also was a bit dismayed to hear last time that parking is plentiful on Prospect Ave. I think anyone who's lived there for any length of time would disagree with that. I can understand the statement that it is allowed there. It certainly is. Some areas it's allowed in, some places it's not, but for the most part, people can park where they want to. So finally, I think it's a matter of, my concern is living across from West Hartford is what's okay. I'm still part of the neighborhood, and I think our concerns ought to be addressed relative to what privacy we may have left living on that street. And just to point out that the neighbors in Hartford were instrumental in making sure that the stop signs went into place. And I can't agree that the traffic has slowed down. I think it has to stop every once in a while, but it certainly has not slowed down. So regardless of how the council's decision goes, I just would like to ask that the owners and employees of 527 just recognize that people live across the street, even though we're in a different town, and be aware of our need for privacy, and that it's kind of hard to mow your yard when there's cars parked in front of it and things like that. And also, if you have service personnel coming in with lots of equipment, ask them to park in front of your building, not in front of my house. Generally, I think this is just asking our neighbors to do what you would do in your own neighborhood. If that's okay in your neighborhood, then...
Ms. Fletcher, the timer went off, so if you could...
Sorry.
Wrap up, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Wagon?
Honorable Mayor Cantor, members of the Town Council, good evening. My name is Edward Wigan. I am the owner of 521 Prospect Avenue. I spoke at our initial public hearing, and I had voiced my strong concerns and opposition at that time, and I'm not going to go over any of that. I've pretty much stated how I feel about things, but I did come to respond a little bit to what was just said, and to also bring validity to a comment and statement I made about they offered to purchase land from us. So I brought in the blueprint of what was provided for me to look at. my pen. And I will share that with the council this evening. All right, it's not bigger. I'm sorry, I can't put it on video for you either. But if you were to blow this up, you'll see some red lines over here, and it shows an existing, and it shows what proposed line would change in order for 527 LLC to do an expansion, and then remain within the setback requirements by the town. Mike Walsh had sent that to me for review with his note here, and I believe that was the turn of the year, somewhere after the turn of the year of 2018. I shared that with Barbara Bergman, the other owner of the property, who is with me tonight, but she was out of town when the initial hearing was held, so I'm just going to carry it forward from here. We looked at the plan and what they, Mike said we'd like to share this with you and see if there's consideration, and we allowed him to do that, and we did look at it. The problem is the same problem that I have now, is their building would be too close to our building, and it would take away from what we have right now as a comfortable, spacious setback between the buildings, unlike what was shown in the video here of what's down the street. And that is totally different from what we have. We certainly don't want that to happen in front of our place, because there is no room down there, and it's just unsightly. So I wanted to show validity to this. I spoke to Mike he called me on the 28th of March, and he offered a number on the property, but we declined. I know how anxious they are to expand. It just would take away from our property, and it's for that reason that I still stand here tonight and oppose this strongly. There was another question that was raised I couldn't answer because I already spoke by Deputy Mayor Kerrigan about what we are, who we are. We are now known as a residential care home. We're licensed by the state of Connecticut, and we have 18 residents. These are elderly and disabled people who live here. This is their home. This is the home we supply them with, and we have been since 1976. They enjoy the park-like settings, the benches along the property line, and what is proposed here is, again, way too close. So I wanted to also answer that question because I wasn't able to last time. Before all this, when we took over, we were actually known as a home for the elderly. That's before the state actually changed the designation of what we are. Mike Walsh just spoke, and he said that I knew they had an intention to expand. Obviously, I did. I am not for this. If I was at the neighborhood meeting, I would have definitely let them know at that time. It's not a small expansion. It's a large expansion, and that expansion affects our property the most on our side. We did sell them the other property, and by the way, just for the record, we hired Lou Weiss's firm and the architects, the same one sitting here today, because if you look at what they supplied me for a drawing, they still have our LLC on here as a name. So we had the whole team before, so we know each other. When we took over,
The timer's going off, if you can wrap up.
Okay. When we went in there, first of all, I see that they have maybe 3 or 4 offices they're trying to expand on. I think that's, if I'm right, that it's 4 offices. That means 4 more people for sure for what we have now. Our parking on the street has changed. They grew, and so did the parking, and it definitely affects us, and it affects everybody up and down. It's like that every day. When we had to put into place, I know the town requires X amount of parking spaces be available for what you are trying to do in any type of setting. We had to fall within those guidelines. I think they fully exceeded it. The screening they speak of, there's not going to be any room for good screening when they put up this proposed addition, because they're right on the line, especially with the AC unit and all that. That's right now coming right to the very end of it. I guess they say they already have 10 employees. It's very busy in there. I just ask the councils, you know, to look at how it is affecting us. It affects the people who reside in that home right now that I represent, and the major changes that this would bring forth would be a detriment to us. And I thank the town council and mayor for hearing me this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Weigand. So that is at the end of the sign-up. If there's anybody else that would like to speak. Okay, so the applicant might want to, and then if there are any questions for my counselors, the counselors.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. I would just like to wrap up, again, absent any questions of the crew we've brought, by repeating that a lot of care and thought and time and money has gone into not only the initial acquisition, but the renovation of the structure for the business, and a fair degree of time, thought, and money has gone into the continued adaptive reuse of the structure. And without being overly glib about it, the Special Development District should be, we think, just that, serve as a rubric, if you will, a framework for continued contextual, intelligent development, as opposed to just a status quo, preservation of the status quo, and adherence strictly to the otherwise applicable zoning regs. And we are a good neighbor. We'd like to continue to be a good neighbor, and would respectfully suggest that if we could in the future work out a real estate deal with our neighbor, we'd love to do that if it makes sense. But we don't think that you guys are the right forum to try to have a conversation about that, or to view you as a mediator in any way about a prospective real estate deal. So you heard our architect discuss why it is that we've got to build the structure that we've got to build in accordance with the fire and building codes to get a minimal amount of new offices in the facility. We'd like to hire some people and continue to be a good citizen of West Hartford. And we think that the relatively minor incursion in the direction of the neighbor's property, considering everything over the whole, which we'd like you to consider, is a good thing clearly for us, and that's self-serving, but it's a good thing for the neighborhood, the district, and the town, and we hope that you agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Crowe. Questions? Mr. Barnes?
Excuse me, can I just ask you one question while you're there, sir? Do you want to,
I think.
I'm sorry, whether you'd like to comment on the presentation by the neighbor with respect to the offer to purchase, the map there? I mean, are you familiar with it? Do you disagree with it? Did it not happen? Is it accurate?
I have not been party to any of the conversations with respect to the neighbor, with respect to the offer to purchase. I think Mike Walsh can probably speak much more factually to this, that there have been some nascent conversations about the possibility of purchasing the property or the strip of the property. And I think I heard Mr. Wiegand say that we can't agree on a number. I think that's an accurate statement at this point. And again, we would say that if there is a real estate deal to be had between the parties in the future, we're always amenable to having a conversation. Apparently, at this point, there's no further dialogue or intention for the parties to sell their respective properties to each other. And we think that under the circumstances that if we want to add jobs, we've got to build, and this is the minimal amount that we can build in a responsible way to make the thing happen. So I don't know what else to say about, prospective real estate deal.
Great, thank you. Can Mr. Walsh come up then and address the question?
I don't know if I can say it as nicely as our attorney just did, but it was nascent in the sense that it was very preliminary and it was vague. I don't recall a specific number being mentioned, but I was told by our architect and our attorney that essentially the way the property is situated, as it goes back, it's almost like a circle. The property expands and back. So what we needed in order to meet the setback requirement is we needed a piece that was kind of like almost like a slice of pizza. In front was real narrow, and then it would go back, it would widen a little bit as it went back. And so we thought, just to avoid this whole process early on, if we could just buy a piece of property from him. It wasn't, we're talking literally inches in front, expanding, I think, to about 9 feet at one point. And so we approached him about that, and the discussions really went nowhere because Mr. Wiegand wasn't interested, as he said. So I think to a large extent, I'm on the same page as him, but there was never any like number or deal. You know, I was trying to see if he'd be interested in a range, and he pretty much said he wasn't, and so that was the extent of it.
Okay, so you agree that the map was prepared, that's on the wall here, that you sent it to him with a note. You may have had some follow-up conversations about it, but you weren't able to reach an agreement on acquiring that portion of the land.
Yeah, the map wasn't prepared for the purposes of purchasing property from him. This map was prepared for our expansion. We were anticipating issues with the setback, and our advisor said, look, one way to maybe avoid the issue is just see if Ed wants to sell you a strip of land. So we called him to see. He said no. But the map was prepared, and all of our efforts have been to undertake this expansion. So that was really more a step along the way. It was never really, these maps were prepared for the expansion.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just address one other thing, Mrs. Fletcher, I'd be happy to talk to our landscapers and ask that they not park on your side of the street. I'll make space in back, so whenever they come to do our property, they're either on our side of the street or they're in back. I'll be happy to do that, to make sure they don't inconvenience you, for what it's worth.
Thank you. I think Mr. Winograd had a question.
Hi, thank you. Just two quick questions. Real quick to ask, maybe not to answer, but.
Sure.
Just in terms of employees, so right now you said what we heard was a maximum of 10 people working at any one time. What would be the new maximum? What is your anticipation?
I'm glad you're giving me a chance to answer that, because we're not looking to hire 4, I can assure you. I think our hopes would be to hire a young attorney and then maybe eventually another young paralegal. So 1 to 1.5. And when in the modern workplace now, we don't have anyone that really works. Well, we have a few that work 9 to 5, but we've got people working 7 to 12. We've got people, because of daycare concerns, they're leaving at 3:30. We have a wide variety of times that people work, and a lot of our paralegals are women, and they do have daycare issues, and we try to accommodate them to the extent we can. We have a law clerk that comes in a couple hours a day. So it's not really, when I say 10, it's not 10 full-time employees. But I would anticipate going to 11 and then maybe 12, but I don't see us going much higher than that. Not in the foreseeable future. Part of what we're doing is we're really cramped right now. And so to the extent we're going to get more space, it will be to spread out, but not necessarily expand our employees.
Thank you. And just one other question. There seems to be some discrepancy between what you had said originally and what your neighbor just stated about the nature of his property. I think what you said was that it was not like it's a residential facility. It was certainly against what I've been in the place. I know there are registered voters.
Yeah, sure.
In the home, and you heard his description of what it is. Would you like to? Take back that statement, because obviously it is a residential facility. People live there.
It is, and I stand corrected. I meant to say it wasn't his residential facility.
Correct. I understand that.
It's not the traditional one homeowner, type, but, I adopt, obviously Mr. Wigan knows much better than I do, the nature of the facility there. And I adopt what he said. I don't challenge it in any way. When I meant to say it wasn't residential, I was talking about the traditional, kind of one owner of a facility.
It's not a single-family home.
It's not a single-family home, exactly.
From our perspective, does that matter to us? I'm not... I'm sort of asking as a legal question. Is there anything in our regulations that would distinguish between a single-family home and this type of facility? So as a legal matter, does that matter? Is that relevant to us?
I think actually Mr. Allaire was going to chime in, but.
Yeah, I think, Counselor, to the extent that the specific designation is relevant. I would just say that because a multifamily residential facility, as opposed to, say, a multifamily apartment dwelling, requires, as Mr. Wagon said, a state license, it is a business, and we're mindful of the fact that the older structures on Prospect and in that neighborhood generally are difficult to economically sustain in terms of maintenance and taxes and expansion and development and redevelopment without some degree of business component. That I can't tell you exactly when, because I'm not a local historian, but there was a time, a couple of generations back, where that model was relatively typical. It was a large single-family dwelling, and enough money existed in the community to support structures like that. And now, fortunately or unfortunately, you want to support a structure like that, it will likely be a business of some kind, and that's probably going to be the case going forward. So I think what Mike was simply trying to articulate, one, that Mr. Wiegand doesn't live there. I don't know how relevant that really is. I think the relevance is it's business to business, albeit our people are there during the workday, and the folks next door do live there, but they live in a business. And we're recognizing that if we look into the future in a special development district, there will probably be more conversation and applications along these lines for a neighborhood and a street like Prospect, certainly on the West Hartford side.
And I guess I'm not sure. I'd like to hear from Pat. Again, from our point of view, making a judgment, how do we treat this property? Do we treat it as if it were a home for a single-family home, or as a real estate office? I mean, is there a distinction from our point of view as to the use of it?
You don't distinguish between the uses. You, in this case, if I recall correctly, and I'm fairly certain I do, the property next door, I think it's 521, is in an R6 zone. So the question is not, well, how is it used? The question is, what's the side yard requirement in that zone? And which is uniform. This property next door happens to be in a different zone, an RO zone. The side yard requirement, as one of the speakers said, is half the height of the structure. So the structure's 28 feet, half the height 14, that's your side yard. In an R6 zone, I was just checking the having trouble because of the light and the size of the text. I believe the R6 zone is 4 feet. So the side yard is actually much closer, but it's uniform whether it's used as a single-family home or as a group home or some variation on a group home, or if it was used for one of the other purposes that might be permitted in an R6 zone. So it doesn't really matter which of them it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Mr. Dodge, did you have something? No? Okay. Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question to Corp Counsel. In an R6 zone, you just said that the setback was 4 feet. And in an RO zone, the setback would be half the distance of the building, which would be 14 feet in this particular circumstance. If this property had been zoned an R6 parcel, then 4 feet would have been adequate, correct?
I believe this property, I'm going to say probably because I'm not certain, was zoned R6 until this application was originally submitted, because this use is not permitted in an R6 zone, so they changed the zone from R6 to RO and to Special Development District to get their original approval. Right. I believe that's the correct history.
So with that being said, then the expectation of somebody residing in an R6 zone would be a 4 feet setback, correct? And here, I think the applicant, I said, is going to be like an 8.5 foot setback. But the only reason that they need a waiver is because during the SDD process, it was changed to an RO zone, which required a more strict setback zone. Is that a fair analysis?
Assuming my recollection of the history is correct, yes, that's correct.
So thank you for clearing that up for me. Now, to the applicant, I understand that you need 8 spaces, you're seeking a waiver of 1. And I do appreciate Attorney Walsh for clarifying a lot of the issues that were outstanding in the previous application with respect to parking and use. The question that still remains is, what is the number of full-time employees employed by the law firm? I understand that there's people that come and go, and attorneys go to depositions, they go to court, clients come and go, other attorneys visit the site. But what is the number of full-time employees? There's 10 full-time employees for the record.
Hey, you have to. Thank you.
They're not 40 hours a week, but in terms of 10 people on the payroll, I think 10 is the answer. Now, they're not there in terms of being there, but yeah, we do have 10 employees.
So it's 10 full-time employees?
Yeah, I think that's the correct characterization.
How many people do you anticipate after this addition would then be employed as full-time employees?
I think in the short term, 11, and in the longer term, 12. That's what I'm envisioning in terms of our growth plan over, the next few years.
What do you consider would be the number of full-time employees that would make the parking situation such that you wouldn't even come close to what's required by our standards? Would that number be 15, 16, where you've definitely outgrown the site?
Yeah, I don't think we're any place close to that, quite candidly. And again, it's a function of the fact we have people working remotely, we have people working at different times. But I can just tell you, you can pull up any time and get a parking space out front. It's not a problem. It really isn't. And we almost always, as I think Attorney Crow said, or I think it was Mr. Bostwick, we always have space in back of the building. So
I think Mr. Cassidy testified that
You're
on
right,
various
Mr. Cassidy.
occasions that
yeah.
when he visited the site, he had no problem finding one of your parking spaces.
Yeah. So I really don't think we're close to a capacity type level with regards to the parking, to answer your question.
What is the building to the other side of your firm? What kind of building is that?
It's the Faraz. We're very friendly with them. It's a private residence. We talk to them on a regular basis. They know what's going on here. It's Mr. Faraz passed away a few years ago. Mrs. Faraz living in the building by herself. She's elderly. Her sons are very attentive, though. They come frequently to check on her and to help her out. And we're very friendly with those neighbors. They're not here, but I can assure you they're very supportive of everything we do.
And are you aware of any situations in the past since you presented your original special development district where there have been complaints about people parking in the street or creating excessive disturbance with respect to the use of your parcel?
No. Excuse me. The only person I think who's made a complaint once has been Mrs. Fletcher, and we tried to correct it as soon as she made it. You were correct. We had an employee parking on her side of the street when the employee shouldn't have been parking there. She advised us of it, and it didn't happen again, and we don't have anyone parking on that side of the street at all on any day. But other than that, I know of no other complaints with regards to parking, and I've never heard Mr. Wigan raise any complaints until this process.
And my last question is, the RO zone, the purpose of it was to take parcels such as yours and structures such as yours that are large enough that no longer can be used, or no longer used, they can be, but they are no longer used as single-family homes, and sort of repurpose them to meet a different intent of the town zoning ordinances, such that in this particular case, to allow a business to operate in a residential zone as an office. And your thoughts on that?
I have to claim ignorance on this a little bit. I wasn't aware of the different zones until Mr. Allaire just explained it. I'll defer to Mr. Crowe. I don't know if we changed. I don't think we did seek a zoning change when we moved in. I think it was already zoned so that we could have our law office there. But you know, I honestly don't know the details other than I think the point you made is a valid point. If, you know, Mr. Wigan's property is in property which the setback is 4 feet, to the extent there's expectations, you know, I think that's relevant as to what the expectation should be with regards to setback. Now, I can assure you, we're nowhere near that. If you look, there's a big side yard between the two buildings, but I think that is an important point.
And I'm sorry, one last question, because in the last thing, we talked about the trash enclosure. And do you recall what the setback was with respect to the enclosed trash enclosure, what that's going to be?
I don't, and again, I'll have to defer to the architect on that. I wasn't even aware. The trash enclosure it's really just a concrete pad right now on that side of the building. But, you know, to the extent that, you know, we need an enclosure, I'm not exactly sure what the dimensions are.
I think of the last portion of this hearing, it was said that it was going to be like some type of wooden structure that was going to enclose it. Is that the only location where that particular structure could be located on this site to accomplish the goal of picking up the trash?
I think so, but again, I defer to the Jim answer that.
So first of all, so we'll call it trash enclosure. What it really is, 2 roll-out cans, similar to a residential structure, a concrete pad, so we can put the cans so they're not on the pavement, they're not in the parking lot. Presently, they're up against this side of the building, the existing addition, facing out towards the neighbor's property without any screening. So what we propose to do is build a new concrete pad off the parking area to accommodate the new addition, but add the same fencing that's along the back. So it's a decorative wood fence, 3-sided. So the cans are only visible from our side, whereas right now they're visible from the neighbor's property. Ultimately, the fence enclosure will be about 5 feet off the property line. But again, it's not a dumpster enclosure. It's not something that a dump truck's going to come in and drive into it early in the morning to pick it up. It's no different than a residence having rollout cans. The other point I'll clarify, because I'm glad that this map is up here. I was part of the team that did the original SDD for this property. This map actually does indicate that the original zone of the property was R6. We actually did get a zone change from R6 to an SDD, and then developed this plan for the conversion of existing residents into the office. And then once that approval was taken care of, the attorneys, Walsh and his firm, bought the property after the zone change and the approval occurred. So the zone change had happened prior. It wasn't done by this applicant. They bought it, they finished it, they did all the renovation. And now they're asking for some modifications so they can expand it.
Thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. David. And we had no doubt that Mr. Allaire recalled correctly, so. Any other further questions from counselors? Actually, Mr. David, I've covered several of my questions, but I had 2 additional. One is there was a mention of an air conditioning unit also on that side. I didn't know if that was a large.
So again, presently on that side of the existing building, there is an air condensing unit because we're adding the addition, we're expanding out that way. What we're proposing right now is to push the AC unit out. So it will be on the side of the structure. The same as it is now. It's no different structure for size than it is now. No different than a residential structure for an AC unit. If there is a request for additional screening or protection, we can do something similar to what we've done here. Either put an enclosure around it or put a piece of fence along that section of the property line to provide additional screening. But once again, it's not a commercial AC unit. It's very similar to what's out there right now.
Okay, so the amount of movement from that where it is now versus where it will be is,
About 9.5 feet.
okay. And the other question I had, there was a mention, I think Mr. Wagon had talked about screening being insufficient. When I looked at the front property and the screening, it looked fairly robust. So I was.
So I think this is a good photo to look at also. That screening that I was showing from the street view is in the front section here. Down, once you get past the addition, we actually had to plant some additional shade trees as part of prior applications. Those shade trees will have to be temporarily pulled up and then replaced. This is going to be to accommodate some drainage work. So, the screening as it is today would remain. We can offer to add some additional screening. My recommendation is not to do any plantings in that area, just because of the dimension from the side of the building to the property line. We had an incident where, if you recall, along the westerly side of the property, the back portion of the property, on the original approval, we actually had a arborvitae hedgerow. We had issues with that growing, so we had to come back before this commission to actually get a modification. And at that point, we put in a decorative wood fence. If there's a requirement for additional screening, we can probably consider something along that lines for screening along that property line.
Okay, thank you. And how high was the fence in the back, did you add, did you recall?
I believe it was 6 feet. Yeah, I believe it was a 6 foot, but again, it was like a wall pole fence company. It was a cedar, very attractive wood fence that we put in there.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, and no, then we will, Mr. Dodge.
I don't know if it would be possible to hear from Mr. Wygan again, but just thinking towards, as we look towards whether to approve or not to approve this, and whether we might consider putting additional conditions on it, I'm just curious from his perspective, if the plan was approved, whether his preference would be for additional screening in the way of a fence or for no additional screening. And
I think we could make this conditional upon, if it's approval to Mr. Wagon, then he could, then we would require that to be added. Yes, Mr. Allaire.
No, my concern is crafting a condition that gives, in essence, a veto authority to someone other than the town council. I think you'd want to impose a condition saying that either there's a fence or a hedgerow, an arborvitae hedgerow or some form of hedgerow of a minimum height of 6 feet, something like that, but not do it conditioned on somebody else's
Understood.
approval.
Mr. Winograd.
Mayor Cantor, to echo a little bit town council's suggestion, I think a condition after the fact involving somebody other than town staff might be a little bit fraught, and perhaps one thing that would be very amenable to, if the council saw fit to approve our application, would welcome a condition being appropriate screening recommended by town staff. And we worked quite a bit with town staff before. We assume under those conditions that town staff would solicit the input of Mr. Wiegand and anybody else necessary, and we're more than happy to live with that.
Thank you, that was going to be my next suggestion. Is there, okay? Right, nothing? No? Okay, with that, we will close the public hearing. Thank you very much. And we will open our next.
Madam Mayor, just
Mr.
for Mr. Wiegand, the map that you provided, we need to keep that for the record, but we can arrange to make a copy and send a copy back to you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Allaire. We will wait for our town clerk for a minute, because she's going to have to take attendance. Call the 7:15 public hearing to order. Ordinance permitting cottage food operations in residence district. We will start with a roll call, Ms. LeBeau.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan's absent. Mr. Sweeney. Here. Mr. Winograd.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
And we have Mr. Stafford sitting in for Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Ms. LeBeau. And again, reminder regarding alternates sitting for regular members. At the last two public hearings on this topic, May 14th, two counselors were absent, Sweeney and Barnes. Since then, both counselors have read the court transcript to this public hearing and are in attendance. Counselor Kerrigan is absent, but we have alternate Stafford here, thank you very much, who has read the transcript to the May 14th public hearing. We will just have a quick, reminder of what this is from town staff, and then we'll go to sign-off sheet.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll ask Mr. McGovern, Director of Community Development, to come forward.
Evening, Mayor and members of Council. Mark McGovern, Community Development Director. If you recall, this hearing was continued mainly because there was a miscommunication at the TPZ level, and we felt as if the referral to the council was not based on all the facts related to the ordinance change, and so it was continued so it could go back to TPZ. They voted with the understanding that all applications for cottage food permits would go to the ZBA for a special exception when that's not the case. Only those who had a license, who wish to entertain clients at their home or have non-resident employees would require a special exception, which is the same process as any other home occupation permittee. And so the TPZ took it up again and sent a positive referral that was acted on June 3rd. Just to quickly summarize the ordinance, cottage food operations presently are not permitted under a home occupation permit program. In 2018, the state of Connecticut's Department of Consumer Protection created a program for cottage food operators. Cottage food are foods that are considered to be low risk in terms of foodborne illnesses, cakes, candies, breads, things like that. Jennifer Nilb was a new West Hartford resident. She had an operation in Vermont. She came seeking a permit only to find out that it wasn't allowable under a home occupation permit section of our zoning code. And that reason was because there's a restriction on having a stock and trade at home and keeping also goods for sale. So the ordinance before you would provide an exemption for a cottage food operator who's licensed by the state of Connecticut. So it's DCP that does the licensing, and that would be a prerequisite for our permit. There are certain restrictions, of course, to qualify, re-inspections, training courses for operators, and no license holder can generate more than $25,000 in revenue. So we worked with CPPS and thought this was a good way in which we could spur entrepreneurship in town, and we can have some cottage food operators work with Kristen on some storefront space when they're ready. This is not a major impact on staff. We get only a handful of home occupation permits each year. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Any questions for Mr. McGovern? Mr. Barnes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And as the mayor mentioned, I was not at the last hearing when this opened, but I have had a chance to review the record. And I just wanted to follow up with one question. So under this proposal, is the applicant going to require the special exception to be able to have clients in the home? And the reason I ask is I know that we considered this in the community planning, and I remember questions about whether people would be coming to pick up goods and things of that sort. And my recollection is that no, it was going to be an out delivery system where the person was going to make the foods and then go deliver them. So we didn't have a concern about people coming into the neighborhood, parking, picking up goods and things of that sort. So if you could just clarify how this is going to work.
You explained it very well. That's exactly right. So any home occupation permittee would not be able to host clients either for consultation or for the pickup of goods without going to the ZBA and asking for a special exception to that.
Okay, so that's how that would work. If they wanted to do that, then
Correct.
they would have to go to the ZBA and get approval for it, and they could approve it or not, or put conditions or restrictions around that based upon whatever the presentation is.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. McGovern, good evening.
Evening.
We received a pretty thoughtful email from a resident concerned about how this ordinance would impact residents who decide to partake in it, who live in multifamily situations or apartment buildings. There were safety concerns articulated, and I was just hoping you could address those.
Sure. The concern was as it relates to a home occupation permittee or a cottage food operator in a multifamily building, whether it be an apartment or a condominium. Some concerns were expressed about overuse of gas ovens, making product sort of extensively, issues related to ventilation. A couple of things at play here. We're not anticipating major commercial operations that were kind of described by the letter writer. That $25,000 cap kind of suppresses that particular issue. At the last hearing, I did note the issue related to commercial-like ovens. Okay, and so ovens have different BTU outputs. Not every gas oven is the same, and she expressed concern about having highly charged gas ovens that you'd see in a restaurant. The issue there is really many commercial-like ovens that you buy. You can put them in your home. You have to do it in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements for installation. And if you're changing over from electric to gas, you're going to have to get a permit for that. So I think there are both the state inspections and if any cottage food operator needed a building permit to upgrade a kitchen, they would go through that process as a means of making sure it's a safe environment.
Okay, thanks. So basically what I'm hearing is essentially that you're comfortable that there's enough enforcement here to be a check on a lot of the concerns articulated.
Correct.
In terms of enforcement, we're basically going to depend upon residential reporting. In other words, imagine a scenario, someone's, sees someone in the neighborhood, there's a lot of cars coming out with pies, and then they'll contact the town and say, hey, someone's selling pies, I don't know what's going on, can you look into it? You guys will say, okay, we'll see if they've got the proper certifications or what have you, and then you'd go from there.
Correct. It'd
Okay.
be like any other zoning enforcement matter. Most of the time, we're reacting to a complaint made, whether it be tall grass or too many cookies, one or the other. We deal with it the same way, yes.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Anything else? All right, is there anybody signed up on the sign-up sheet?
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Chuck Coursey, 21 Walbridge Road. I'm here again in my capacity as chairperson of the West Hartford Chamber of Commerce's Economic Development Committee. Not going to be very long. Mr. Williams, I'm very glad you brought up that letter that was sent in by the same woman who had concerns the original time. We wanted to make sure that we came. She brought up some very good concerns, in both letters, that we as a chamber, when we considered endorsing this, that we also had the same concerns. And the town, as Mr. McGovern had stated, that they have no problem with it. And I'd also add that it's not just enforcement from the town, but they also have to be registered with the state. So it's kind of a dual in that regard. So I don't have much more to offer, although I would add, as I said last time, I think these, from a business standpoint, these are like small business incubators, because as soon as they get, hopefully, Ms. Nelb, who's here tonight, is going to be very successful, and she's going to be able to move out of her home, her business out of her home, and join one of our wonderful retail centers, which is good for business. So we're very excited about this, as the chamber is, and we encourage you to support it. I'm going to, Chris Conway, the executive director of the chamber, I'm going to let him say a few words too.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Town Council. I'm here just to basically repeat what I did last time. We did submit the letter last time. I can read it again if you'd like, or just, okay, good. So I do have this letter. I just changed the date on it, and here it is.
Thank you both.
But I will just add what Chuck said. This type of suggestion is consistent with the Chamber's mission to encourage business and hopefully get them to be successful, grow, and remain businesses in West Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else that is here that would like to speak to this public hearing? No? And any further questions from counselors? All right, with that, I will close the public hearing. We will take a 5-minute break, I guess. I'm getting some looks. Okay, 5 minutes, and we will be back for the council meeting.
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
He's got a cold. All right, we will start with roll call. Ms. LeBreau?
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Yep, unmute her. Okay. Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd. Mr. Williams.
Here.
And we have Mr. Stafford sitting in on the applications.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Right. I know I just said you need to mute Beth, and I will leave you on. Okay? Very good. She's okay. Oh, jeez. Hello?
Here?
Okay, yep, we got you. But now you put yours on mute, and I'm leaving you on the mic. Okay? So we can't hear your background noise, but you can hear us. We can hear you. I mean, you can't hear. You know what I mean. We can't hear your background noise, but okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules to present two proclamations. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. I will start with meeting Ms. Flater at the podium. Sorry, we're, late, an hour late. It is the way we run, I guess. So this is a very special celebration, and this weekend, I'll read the proclamation. Whereas the health and vitality of a community is reflected in the participation of its citizens in those activities that foster the strength of the town, and whereas Playhouse on Park is dedicated to its mission to provide quality performing arts production at affordable costs to as broad an audience as possible, to embrace and provide opportunities for professional, emerging, and community artists, and to offer educational and outreach opportunities through visiting and or resident artists and educators, and whereas Playhouse on Park has established itself over the past decade as a professional theater attracting award-winning directors, professional actors, playwrights, and designers to our town, and has melded professional performers with the talents of local aspiring actors, and has developed rich educational offerings serving West Hartford students and public schools, as well as those of neighboring communities. And whereas Playhouse Theater Group, Inc., the parent nonprofit organization which manages Playhouse on Park, was formed in 2009 by Tracy Flater, Sean Harris, and Darlene Zoller, has been a good neighbor in the town of West Hartford throughout this time. And whereas Playhouse on Park will celebrate its 10th anniversary with a gala event on Saturday, June 15, 2019 at the Gershon Fox Ballroom, to which all are invited and at which memorable performances from production over the past 10 years will be presented. Now therefore be proclaimed that on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of West Hartford, I, Mayor Sherry G. Cantor, do hereby congratulate Playhouse on Park, one of our leading theaters in the state of Connecticut, on its 10th anniversary, and extend sincere appreciation for its commitment to building a strong community through the arts in our town. And just say congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words?
Oh, my goodness. No, I'd be happy to. I can't say thank you enough for this proclamation. When we discovered we would be moving into the Playhouse space 10 years ago, it was quite unexpected, and we were sort of taking over an organization that had gone through a bankruptcy. We started with absolutely nothing. Spent many years not knowing if we could have another season, but I will say it was the West Hartford community that really rose up and made sure that they could support us enough until we were viable to stand on our own. Park Road Association, Richard Patrici and Angela Faenza were going door to door, collecting donations in our first year, and we are so proud to represent West Hartford in this state with all the other arts organizations that we join on a regular basis. And I think that we can't wait to see what the next 10 years brings, but we wouldn't be here without you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much again. Congratulations.
Thank
We're so
you.
proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, come on Saturday. Go on Saturday. Thank you. And Mr. Walters. So we're a little bit late, but I still think it's timely. It's June month and it's Pride Month. Whereas June is recognized for celebrations of Pride by the LGBTQ community to mark the anniversary of Stonewall riots, and whereas June 12, 2019 marks the third anniversary of the Pulse shooting in which 49 persons lost their lives and another 53 were wounded at a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and whereas June 27, 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the raids and subsequent riots at the Stonewall Inn, a recognized gathering place for the LGBTQ community in New York City, and whereas in the last 2.5 years there has been a rollback in rights for the members of the LGBTQ community, particularly our trans brothers and sisters, and whereas LBGT youth are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth, and 92% of trans adults have reported suicide attempts before the age of 25. Whereas 9 of 10 LGBTQ youths have reported harassment at school, 3/5 of LGBTQ youth report feeling unsafe at school, and whereas West Hartford is a town of compassion with a diverse LGBTQ community representing all walks of life. Now therefore be it proclaimed that on behalf of the Town Council of West Hartford and the residents of West Hartford, I, Mayor Sherry G. Cantor, do hereby recognize the month of June as LGBTQ Pride Month in the town of West Hartford and recognize the invaluable contribution made by the LGBTQ community. And I want to thank Barry for requesting that actually we are going to be raising the Pride flag tomorrow morning at 8:30, right, on Goodman Green. And as a sign of our the town's understanding and embracing the LGBTQ community and our compassion and understanding and welcoming. So, and you are chair of the Human Rights Commission, and would you also co-chair, right? And would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I greatly appreciate this, as do many here in West Hartford. It's a very supportive community, and many of us know that just from the outwards show that we get. We have raised the flag once before, and we've had a rally on the steps, and it was really heartwarming to see the response that we received to that. And I'm hoping tomorrow morning that we will see that same kind of response. And thanks.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, here you go, hon. Okay, item number 2, Mr. David.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move approval of the minutes of the Town Council meeting of 5/28/2019 and the minutes of the public hearing minutes of the ordinance permitting cottage food operations residence districts on 5/14/2019.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. We'll look to see if there's anybody signed up to anything on this agenda that's not the subject of a public hearing. If there's anybody that would like to, in the audience, that wants to speak to something that has not been the subject of a public hearing. Okay. Number 4, Mr. David.
Madam Mayor, I move that we place on consent items 13A through C.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. 5A, Mr. David.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve an application filed on behalf of 527 Prospect LLC, owner of 527 Prospect Avenue, to amendment Special Development District number 123 to permit an approximately 984 square foot 2-story addition for expanded office space. Associated landscaping, parking, and drainage improvements are proposed.
Motion's been made and seconded. We had 2 public hearings, actually, a continued public hearing on this. So we will be voting by, we will be voting on this, but we'll start with some comments. Anybody would like to start? Yes, and I just would like to notice that Mr. Stafford is sitting in for Ms. Kerrigan. Okay, then I'm sorry?
Do you want me to start off?
Yes, Mr. Barnes.
Very good, thank you. This is a tough application for a number of reasons, but for me, it comes down to property rights. And so counsel for the applicant had made a couple comments during his presentation that this proposal worked for the neighbors, that it met zoning regulations or zoning requirements, which are not true because one of the neighbors opposes it and they're here seeking a waiver of the setback. And to the extent with respect to the proposal of the purchase of the property, to suggest that he didn't want the council to sit as the intermediary between, that transaction, well, I wholeheartedly agree. But the suggestion that, they could work out an arrangement after the structure was built seems like no solution at all to the property owner to the south. And so, in light of that, I support the property rights of the abutting neighbor, and that this setback would not be in fairness or equity to the neighbor, and I'm not willing to approve something that they couldn't work out amongst themselves in a private transaction, and then have us sanction it. And to the extent that council suggested that the special development district was designed for this type of situation where, we could, make the best use of the property, I don't actually agree with that. It certainly doesn't give us the authority to provide setbacks whenever somebody makes a proposal like this. And so I'm going to vote no on the application.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Anybody else? Okay, Ms. Fay.
Yes, so notwithstanding what you just went through with property rights, is this off? On? It's on, right? I'm actually going to approve this. I think the owners have done a terrific job with the building. I think it's an enhancement to the street. I drive by there at least 2 or 3 times a day, every day. And I've seen how the property's been approved. I'm not a zoning expert like some people here are, but it seems to me just a little bit of a technical discrepancy where he did have the original zoning that would have permitted the 4-foot setback, and because it was changed for some other reasons, it became larger. So I think he kind of got caught in the middle of that. So I think it's a good enhancement. I think we want to foster business expansion in town. I think we want to continue to grow our grand list, and I think we want to continue to have people employed, which will contribute to our state income tax and other things. So I think for financial reasons, and for the demonstration that the property owner at this location has demonstrated with keeping it up beautifully, and it really is, I'm going to support this. And I do think it is sort of a technical thing where the zoning was changed and he would have been okay, and now he's got caught with a setback. I still think it's, certainly double or more than double what the 4 feet would have been. He's up to 8.9 feet. I think, I look at that property and I see the trees and the natural barriers between the two, and I think that's a good thing, and we want development. I don't think any kind of development, you've seen that I have voted against things too, but I think this one is logical. I think it makes sense. I think they've proven their ability to enhance the neighborhood and be good neighbors. In terms of parking, and I do respect the woman from Hartford, we're all neighbors together, and just because the street has one side West Hartford, one side Hartford, doesn't mean that we should disrespect any neighbor. It's a very big public street with lots of parking. You can park virtually anywhere on that street. And unless that's changed, I don't know really how to do that other than the Attorney Walsh, that he will speak with his landscapers and other people who service his property to make sure they park on his side. But it's kind of one of those situations when you buy a house on a very busy mixed-use commercial as well as residential street, that's kind of goes with the territory. So I'm very supportive of this endeavor.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to both agree and disagree with Ms. Fay, although I think I ultimately agree that I'll be voting to approve the project. I was very interested in the discussion of Mr. Allaire's discussion of the zone change. And my area of disagreement is simply that I don't think it's purely technical, because the reason for the zone change was it was a change in use. And so there is a reason why there's a greater setback for an RO lot than an R6 lot. But that being said, it does, I too, I'm familiar with the property and I've driven by the property. a few times over the past few days in anticipation of this. And what I do think the change in zoning is relevant to is whether it's in harmony and conformance with the rest of the neighborhood, the change that we're asking for. And, it's interesting to me that the neighbor actually, if he chose to expand his property, could go up to 4 feet away from the property line. And that would be perfectly permissible. And so when I look at the neighborhood and I look at the character of the expansion that's happening here, it's an R lot, so I know it's resident office, but it is a very attractive building. I do think that the expansion that's been described is going to be in harmony with the neighborhood. I think it's going to fit right in, and I don't think it's going to overly encroach on the neighbor's property. Again, there's still going to be a 9-foot setback. I just looked back through the application between the structure and the property line. And so, for those reasons, I think it will be in harmony with the neighborhood. I think it will be in conformance with the overall character of the area. I also, in terms of the parking concerns, it's a busy street where there are a number of businesses on it, and people do park on both sides. And that's permitted. And so I'm not overly concerned with taking up a huge number of parking spaces, particularly because, I think that the primary reason for the expansion, as it was described, was to add more attorneys. It didn't sound as though there would be a huge uptick in clients, for instance, coming to visit the property, or customers, if you want to say it that way. And so the one thing I would say, Madam Mayor, and I don't know if it's appropriate yet, is the issue of keeping the neighbor in mind. And I know that he had said that one thing that the residents in his building enjoyed was the park-like setting of the property, and that's why I sort of hesitated, on the question of whether we should, whether a fence would be appropriate or additional landscaping, or whether anything at all would be appropriate. Because again, if the intent or if his preference was to maintain a park-like setting, then maybe open space is more preferable. And so that's where if appropriate, Madam Mayor, and I would leave it to Mr. Allaire to articulate better than I can. I would support a motion to require some additional screening in consultation with town staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. So I would also agree with that, and I was going to bring it up in my comments. So we will make an amendment and vote on the whole amended application.
So the procedure would be to move to amend to add a condition.
Right.
During the break, I scratched something out. My suggested language would be, and I should start by saying currently this is, by virtue of its age and the sort of basic nature of the application, there are no existing conditions of approval. This would be the only condition of approval. As offered during the public hearing, the applicant shall install screening along the southern boundary of the property as approved by the town planner. And based on the comments made during the hearing, I think it's clear to everybody that the town planner is going to work with the applicant and reach out to Mr. Wigan as well to determine the best kind of screening for that.
So just to clarify, when we vote, it will be as amended.
You would move to amend, have a vote on the amendment, and then vote on it as amended.
Okay.
Can I ask, I didn't get a sense from, I mean, I heard that they offered it. I didn't hear an acceptance of that screening from the neighbor. And I also don't, how are we going to procure the right way to word this for this application for screening? Like, what does that look like?
Well, what I just read is what the condition would be. The approval letter that goes from Ms. LeBreau would incorporate that language as the condition of approval, the only condition of approval. It may well be that we can't, or the town planner can't find some agreement, and in which case he's going to do the best he can to determine what screening is most appropriate for that location.
But so we're putting on a requirement that is not defined for this person. I mean,
I mean, we've debated similar things before, but we're putting on a requirement of screening that could not be resolved as well, right?
Well, it'll be resolved by the town planner. He'll determine what the appropriate screening is, whether it's a fence or a hedge or some combination thereof.
But the idea is to have an agreement between the neighbors of an effective screening, and based on the conversation we had tonight, there doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement between the two on how to maintain this property and this difference. It just doesn't, it seems like, I mean, I would agree with, I mean, I'm supportive of this measure, but I think where Mr. Barnes is correct, I think there are some things outside of here that the two have not been able to agree upon, and I feel like if we're gonna throw another requirement on here that simply is just aggravating the situation further, either we're gonna clearly approve what they've put out here, or we're not. I didn't hear the neighbor asking for this, or defining what they're looking for. So I just feel like we're asking for another kind of squishy situation and putting an undue burden on the applicant, just based on the back and forth I heard today from the folks. And I support the measure, but I just don't think that putting an additional requirement on here makes these things any better.
So just to be clear, so far there's no motion to amend on the table. So I think your comments are well taken and appropriately belong in the debate on the motion to amend, but maybe it should be on the table first before.
Excuse that, I just was trying to understand. I'm getting ahead of myself. So to be clear, we are going to put together, or there may be an amendment offered about something that may or may not be agreed upon by the neighbors that has not been defined yet by the town planner, that needs to be then created after we do this amendment.
The neighbor is not an applicant before you. The neighbor is not a party to the application, and he is not bound by what you approve. The objective of the exercise would be to work with the applicant, come up with some screening, reach out to the neighbor to see if there is a way to make it more palatable to the neighbor. And if it can't be made more palatable to the neighbor, then to do the best we can, in our judgment, in the town planner's judgment, to put up something that's suitable in that location.
Just to be clear, we still could have a situation, hypothetically, the town planner comes back and puts something together that's not great and doesn't get agreement from the neighbor in the process, and we're putting this, we would then have this new requirement based on this proposed amendment that they would then have to do regardless of whether the neighbor in their conversations with the town planner thought it was a good idea.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anybody? Mr. Leonograd.
Right, and so could we do one? I understand the reluctance to give a neighbor a veto, but can't we give the planner discretion to require a barrier if he feels it's necessary? So leave open the possibility of, you know, those options of a fence or plantings or whatever else, or nothing. To Dallas's point, that it might be better to leave it open space. What? Yeah, I don't hear it that way, because he's saying a barrier and sort of debating what kind as opposed to if at all. And I think if we added that, then we give that full discretion to the planner to decide with consultation with the parties that maybe we're better off with nothing at all.
We could add language saying, if determined appropriate by the town planner, I'm struggling with the grammar here, but if determined appropriate and to the extent approved by the town planner. As Mr. Hart just mentioned to me, we don't want to put the town planner in the position of being judge and jury of, what's ideal here. That's not really the exercise. The town planner is in the position every day of looking at the standards. We have certain classes of screening, for example, and determining what's appropriate and saying this is what we require. And having a certain amount of flexibility with that, but not a whole lot. This one's kind of open-ended.
Mr. Hart?
Yeah, just to add to Mr. Allaire's comments, I'd be concerned about a situation where we expect the town planner to broker an agreement between the two neighbors. And what if that can't happen?
And to be clear, I don't think that's what the applicant offered, and I don't think that's what I was trying to say in my draft. The objective was the applicant offered to put up screening as determined by the town planner, with the understanding that the town planner was going to reach out to the neighbor and see if there was a preference. Do you want to keep it open because the residents like the park-like setting? Do you want a fence? Do you want hedges because they look nicer than a fence? Along those lines, but not to give the neighbor veto power or even a thumbs up, thumbs down authority, just to see if there was a meeting of the minds there that could be worked out.
I would just kind of follow up with what Matt said in the sense of, I think we're extending this process to put the onus of making a decision that should be decided here to the town planner, and I just don't think that it's appropriate for us to consider putting them in that position when we have a motion before us. They've gone through all of the proper proceedings, and I think what we have before us is what we have before us. And I agree with you, Matt. I think these type of situations get kind of borne out a little bit too much when the town is speaking in some sort of authority that is not clear. And I just wouldn't want to put that on their shoulders for this situation, based on what we heard tonight, based on the inability for the two to come to an agreement.
Mr. Judge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And the reason I'd asked the question during the hearing and the reason why I brought it up now is that the only reason I would support a requirement of any screening would be if the neighbor felt that that was preferable to no screening. I do think that Mr. Allaire's amendment, at least the way I read it, would give the town planner the sole discretion to determine whether screening was appropriate and what kind of screening was appropriate. I think our expectation, obviously knowing the way that our town staff conducts itself, would be that they would reach out to the neighbor to find out what their preference is. I don't think this is going to be a drawn-out, prolonged thing. I think this is a matter of probably a phone call, and then the town planner will make a determination. I don't think we're carrying out any kind of there's no administrative process that would be part of that. There's no additional proceedings that would be required. I don't expect that there would be a lengthy negotiation that would be necessary, and I fully entrust that our town planner is capable of accomplishing that. And so, I would support the motion as written. I know it hasn't been moved yet, and I think we're potentially being a little premature in debating it at this point. But again, my intent was, listening to what the neighbor had said, where it did seem like there was a preference for open space. If their preference is not to have a fence there, I don't want to put a fence there because I don't know who that benefits then. So, I think that the proposed amendment that has not been moved yet would accomplish those objectives and is not going to be a drawn out or difficult thing for our town planner to accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Dutch. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mr. Stafford.
Yes. I had concerns about the parking, especially at the last meeting. They modified it a little bit today and made me a little bit more comfortable, but I always felt that if you went for a zone plan and they told you how many parking spaces you were required to have, you couldn't say, well, we're going to park 2 on the street. And yet, I look at what they have done with a piece of property that probably would have gone, it certainly would not have stayed a single-family home in that neighborhood in the condition it is today. And the fact that they came in there and they spent their money to improve it, and they now call it their office home and want to expand on it and stay there, I think speaks volumes of them. And so, for that reason, I'm going to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think what's important in this discussion is that this parcel is in the RO zone. If one looks at the history as to why this zone was created, it was exactly as discussed in the public hearing portion of the application, and that's some of these parcels are too big to be sustained as single-family homes. So councils before us thought, well, maybe these would be great opportunities for office spaces as the next best use here. And that's what's happened with this particular parcel. As was indicated in the testimony, they invested over $300,000, which is a significant sum of money to make it look like a residential dwelling. But the only thing that's different is the particular use that goes on within the four walls of that building. And our job is not to regulate the particular use, but to see whether or not it's in harmony with the rest of the district. And I think the applicant did provide sufficient evidence to show other homes on Prospect Avenue which are being used for commercial purposes, an insurance agency, something I think for Frontier and some other thing. And I think that's what we've asked people to do when they make applications for RO zones. The concern we have about parking is legit, because what we asked people to do was try to provide all your parking within your site so that you weren't exacerbating the situations in the residential neighborhood, forcing cars on the street or inconveniencing your neighbors. But in light of this, and I think we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and in this particular instance, it's not unusual to see cars parked on both sides of Prospect Avenue on a daily basis. And the applicant, through their testimony, indicated that their work schedules and their workload were such that they probably could accommodate all their employees on their site if necessary. And we sort of lost fact of the part that people could also even park in the driveway. It's not a parking space, but temporary. They could park in the driveway, and people could move their homes. No different than if a resident had guests come to their home and somebody needs to go out, you just move your car. But that's not the most ideal situation, and we definitely should work for situations to provide parking. So my question to Mr. Allaire is, do we need to talk about in the motion the waiver of the parking space as well as the setback, the waiver on the setback? Because that's not part of the motion currently as written.
The application before you requests both the waiver of the setback and the waiver of the parking space.
So even though it's not in what I read, it's fine that's
Yes.
what they asked. We don't need any further.
Yes.
Okay, then that's fine. With respect to this issue that we keep talking about, this screening, I'd like to move the amendment proposed by Mr. Allaire so that we could get this totally on the record and leave it within the discretion of our planner. I have total confidence in the planner to determine the appropriateness of the type of screening that's necessary. We've done this on many different applications with respect to that issue. And if it's determined that nothing is necessary, I'm certain the planner will reach that same conclusion. But I think the screening issue should not come as a surprise. And it's basically, we're asking the applicant to bear the cost of the screening, and the applicant had no objection to providing screening if deemed necessary by the planner. And this is something that had not been discussed at the town planning and zoning level. So if my colleagues think that's appropriate, then we go with it. For me, it's not a loser on this entire application, because I think what we've asked people to do is to invest in these properties, to make certain that the zones transition, that they're in harmony with the rest of the neighborhood, and that there's adequate protection to the abutters in respect to what's really happening there. So, and I do think that being one parking space short is not a killer deal here. And that's another criteria that we need to determine whether or not there's adequate parking on a special development district. And in my opinion, there is, because of what's available on site as well as what's on the street. And I would also like to say that we explored whether or not they ought to put in like paver type things in the front yard. I don't really think that's really necessary. I think when one looks at the house itself, the office, I think it would be more unsightly to see a car parked out front in the front yard, where we really don't want to encourage people putting automobiles in front yards. We don't like it in our residential zones. I don't think we'd want to encourage that here in this thing. And that would be the only way that they could really accomplish getting to the 8 spaces. So for all those reasons, I'll support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Mr. Williams, you're good? Okay. I'll speak to this, and then I just have a suggestion on the amendment. I don't know if it's going to help or not, but life is changing pretty rapidly for all of us, and when we look, what is West Hartford going to look like in 10 or 20 years? The big homes are really more difficult, especially older big homes on major roadways, are harder to maintain and more expensive, and there's less the people that want to use them as primary residents. So it is important that we are flexible and responsive to that, because the alternative is we're going to have blight, and we're going to have properties that are not taken care of, and these are historic properties that really need some love and care. As Mr. Stafford said, this is the alternative, and the alternative was a vacant and uninhabitable space that has had significant reinvestment. So, adaptive reuse is going to be a word that we're going to be hearing for a very, very long time. This use, this RO zone, it fits well, and having it have been an R6 zone, and the fact that this is within that, yes, there is some opportunity for to actually have a variance on this, but it's the 4 foot is what is required pretty much up and down much of the street, and exists up and down much of the street. I am a little concerned about the air conditioning, as I had highlighted, because the building structure might be ending there, but the air conditioning is not. And I actually had an air conditioning discussion with my neighbor at one point, and it wasn't great. So it's hard to go back and say, you need to move it or something. So I was trying to plan for that situation. The other comment that struck me was that some of that screening would have to be taken down. So actually it would not exist. It would actually have to be taken down for construction. So that's where I think that the screening piece of it is, we are missing a little piece there, and there is an opportunity. I was wondering if we could have a year look back, if that would be something that, he don't like that.
not on a zone change.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just feel a little unsettled. I think this is a great project. I think this is something that we need to, that is right for this property. But those two pieces are a little bit troublesome to me. So I do actually think that the town planner can help to rectify that, because it wasn't so specific in the application or in the, yes, Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have council's experience with our land use regulations here, but with respect to the screening requirement, I wonder if it would be preferable to require the applicant to provide additional screening subject to the approval of the town planner. So in that scenario, it's not the town planner determining whether or not screening is appropriate. I think if he thought it was necessary, would have noted it previously in the process here. But if based on the testimony, you think adding that requirement would be appropriate, I would suggest you put that burden on the applicant, and then the town planner can approve the nature and type of screening.
Sounds good.
And along those lines, Mr. Hart whispered that idea to me, and I ran back. So just to be clear, technology is not working. My code online wasn't working. I had to run and get my hard copy. There is actually a screening requirement between a commercial and residential property in an RO zone. It isn't much of a requirement. It is, bear with me for just a second. It's what we call type A screening. It's so much better when technology works. Type A screening is a strip at least 5 feet wide, and plant material shall consist of large trees spaced about 50 feet on center, or flowering trees spaced 25 feet on center, or a mixture of both. That's actually, I believe, what's shown on the plans. It's not much of a screen if you're looking for visual screening. The town planner has, under the Special Development District Ordinance, the ability to approve certain administrative amendments, but one of the things he specifically is prohibited from doing is adjusting the location of plantings required for screening from adjacent residential zones. So, in an effort to come up with something that works, I drafted, as offered during the public hearing, the town planner is authorized to approve an administrative amendment adding screening to the southern boundary of the SDD, but not removing any required screening. So that if additional screening is desired by the neighbor to the south, and if the applicant comes back to us and proposes an administrative amendment that they've sorted out, then Todd could approve it. It also comes back to you, by the way, for a thumbs up, thumbs down ratification vote if he does that. So I think
Kind of look backish a little bit.
it's sort
not
of
really.
look backish.
All right, so
listening to the applicant and the neighbor tonight, Madam Mayor, and I take them both at their word that I think that they generally seem to, notwithstanding this, get along fairly, or at least it seemed like they were on speaking terms. And that the amendment has now changed where it would only be at the option of the applicant that they would come back to us, and I don't see why they would. I don't think an amendment is necessary, and I would actually, I think my hope would be that the applicant would, after, this is approved and based on their relationship, it sounds like he would go back to the abutter and ask, would you like a fence there? Would you like some additional landscaping? But again, I think that the amendment at this point overcomplicates it. I don't think it's necessary, especially if it's something that's that would need to be moved by the, or would need to be requested by the applicant, and would also bring us back into it. And so, given all that, I've come full circle. And
okay, all right. Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. Since it appears that I'm standing alone here this evening, I just want to make one final point. There's been some talk about large homes and to be able to reuse these homes and the possibility of blight and what the alternatives are. Well, we don't have to worry about that because we addressed that issue, not me specifically, but this council did when we changed the zone from an R6 to an RO and turned this into a special development district. So this isn't a blighted property. This is actually a law firm, right? An operating business on this site today. So that's not a concern. That is not before us. What's before us is whether we're going to allow them to put 1,000 square foot, 2-story addition on their current building, which crosses the property line into their neighbors or into the setback area between these two properties. That's what's before us, and these neighbors tried to work it out and were unable to. But what we're doing today isn't addressing, potential blight or something that, enhances this neighborhood. We're letting this homeowner, this business owner, do something that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and he couldn't accomplish it through a transaction with his neighbor. So we are basically doing something that he couldn't do on his own. And so I just want to make it clear that That's what's before the council today. It's not about trying to fix a blighted property, because if that were the case, I would be in support of it. And with respect to the change from the R6 to the RO zone, I am not a scholar in this area, but it seems to me that if that change wasn't made, he wouldn't have a law firm on this property because it was zoned for residential use. And so now he has a business on that property. And it seems like he wants the best of both worlds. He wants to switch it to get the business. And then it seems it's been convincing to some of my colleagues to say, well, he could have just had a 4-foot, variance or setback between these two properties. Well, he couldn't have both. He had to have one. And he decided to have the RO with the Special Development District so he could have his law firm. And now he wants the benefit of what it was, now that he has what he has, to have the lesser setback. And so to me, and for the reasons I previously stated, I'm going to oppose the application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barnes. So I think we'll vote on this, and if anybody wants to raise the amendment, that's fine, but I think we're probably fine. If we may hear about it, but we will, I think there probably will work something out if need be. All right, with that, we will go for a roll call. Ms. Sobro?
Mr. Barnes?
No.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
Yes.
Mr. Stafford?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Winograd?
Yes.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
It's approved.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. 5B, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of an ordinance permitting cottage food operations in resident districts.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Again, this was also the subject of a public hearing and a continued public hearing. And so is there anybody that would like to speak to this? Mr. Winograd, would you like to? Because it came out of your committee.
Thank you. So, don't have a whole lot to add to what Mark said. We did talk about this quite a bit in committee. It was a good discussion. We looked at the various options. We heard from the one small business owner who brought it to us and her desire to open this business. And we certainly went through a lot of the scenarios that have come up in terms of people visiting or what the impact on neighbors. And ultimately, I do think that this comes down to an economic development move we can make to encourage this sort of small business growth, hopefully leading to the businesses. So it did come out as approved, I believe, by the whole committee, and would recommend approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Anybody else? Ms. Fay?
Thank you. I don't know what the statistic is, but there are many, many, many businesses that were started in somebody's home. I think even Microsoft was started in a garage, or Apple, or one of those. So I think it's good that we have these incubators that people can do with nominal investment to start a business out of their home. As long as we can control and make sure that they aren't violating traffic and people coming into the homes and picking up things and things like that, and that there's some sort of safety measure, which I think there is, that you described, to make sure that they're not making, sushi out of their house or something like that, where it could be harmful to people. I would be very supportive of this. I think about the business, which is in Manchester, was Carla's Pasta, and that's gigantic, and that was started out of Carla's Kitchen. So I think these are positive things, and I think we do need more small business in our state and in our town. So I would definitely support this.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Dodge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. I agree. I think it's interesting to think of these as sort of small business incubators in a way. And so I would just say to the folks who have been advocating for this, who have been hoping for this, I wish you all the success in the world, and I hope that at some point your cottage business becomes a storefront business, because that would be the best thing for our town. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Anybody else? I also want to say I want to thank our town staff for their support on this, because it's a lot of work. We keep going around sometimes, and for the for residents and for the committee led by Ben Winograd to keep looking at this and trying to get it just right. So that's wonderful. I also remember reading an article about Stacy's Chips that came out of a home, and Aunt Annie's actually also came out of a home, and my kids have a lot of those, used to have a lot of those. So you never know where it will lead, and I think this is a very entrepreneurial, wonderful way to allow people to express themselves in their artistic and business acumen. So I also will be supporting it. I'm very excited about this. So all of those, so we need a roll call, Ms. Lebrow?
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
Yes.
Mr. Stafford?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Winograd?
Yes.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
It's approved.
Wonderful. Mr. Stafford, thank you so much for multiple public hearings on multiple nights. Appreciate it. Okay. Okay, take care. Now we were on 5C, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt a resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a lease with the West Hartford Housing Authority.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart, would you like to?
Thank you, Mayor. I would invite Ms. Rubino Turco to come forward and briefly cover this item.
Good evening, Mayor Cantor and Town Council. Helen Rubino Turco, Director of Social Services and Leisure Services. The Hillcrest Area Neighborhood Outreach Center, HANOC, is located at 105 Hillcrest Avenue. It's a building that's owned by the West Hartford Housing Authority. The town has leased this property for almost 20 years, and the current lease expired, and both parties intend to continue the relationship for another 5-year lease and onward. This lease is a 5-year lease. It's retroactive actually to July 1, 2018, and it would continue, be in effect through June 30th, 2023. Chapter 13, Section 6 of the town charter requires that when the town leases a property, the town council has to authorize the town manager to execute the lease. But first, the town council must refer the lease to the town plan and zoning for review and an opinion. And this was done at your last town council meeting. It was referred to the TPZ that met on Monday. They rendered an unanimously positive opinion at their meeting on June 3rd. And therefore, we now request that the town council authorize the town manager to execute the lease with the West Hartford Housing Authority.
Thank you, Ms. Rubino Turco. Any questions or comments? No, thank you. So with that, all in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. And I will just mention that HANOC does incredible work, and we're very grateful for the Housing Authority for their support and resources, too. 6A, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we set for public hearing on July 16, 2019 at 5:40 in the Legislative Chamber and refer to TPZ and DRAC, an application of West Hartford Fellowship Housing, lessee of 10-60 Starkle Road, to amend Special Development District Number 87 to permit the redevelopment of the existing 213-unit affordable housing complex. The proposed redevelopment contemplates the demolition of all the existing buildings except for the building at 60 Starkle Road, and the construction of 6 new residential buildings, a new maintenance building, renovations to the 60 Starkle Road building, and associated parking facilities, site lighting, landscaping, recreational, pedestrian, and site improvements. A total of 308 age-restricted and accessible units is proposed under the redevelopment. The applicant has requested a waiver of the required fees pursuant to Section 177-50M.
Motion's been made and seconded, and I just want to make a special note that the applicant has requested a waiver that we will be talking about in conjunction with the application. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. B, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we set for public hearing on July 16, 2019. I move adoption of a ordinance of the town of West Hartford. Oh, hold on. Oh, wait, I'm right. I move, start over. I move that we set for public hearing on July 16, 2019 at 5:30 in the Legislative Chamber, an ordinance of the town of West Hartford designating intersections to be regulated against blockage under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 14-250B, Subdivision A.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. 6C, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you. I move adoption of a resolution amending the salary range of non-union director positions.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is an item that we reviewed, that I reviewed with the Council's Finance and Budget Committee at its meeting on May 22nd. And I am requesting the Council's approval to adjust the salary range for our directors. The current range is set at $85,000 to $150,000, relatively large range. And my understanding is we have not hired anyone to fill one of these senior positions below $100,000 in many, many years. And I am requesting council approval to adjust the range to bring it to a new range of $100,000 to $165,000. There are 13 positions in this range, this salary grouping. It includes all of our senior directors, police chief, fire chief, etc., as well as the full-time attorneys in Corporation Counsel's office. And I'm making this recommendation for a couple of key reasons. Number one, several of the directors, 5 or 6 or so, are very close to the top of the range, or they are at the top of the range, and there isn't any other advancement that I can make for them. And then secondly, in consultation with our human resources staff, we looked at the CCM salary survey and other data. Salaries in other Connecticut communities currently exceed what we offer. And I think it's important for the town that we remain competitive so that we can recruit and retain talent. So the way that pay adjustments work for our directors, these are merit increases. So these employees do not receive an automatic general wage increase or a COLA like employees in many of our bargaining units do. What happens is I conduct an annual review with them, and then based upon their performance during the previous year, would make or perhaps not make a salary adjustment based on their performance. So I'm seeking council's approval. Had a very good discussion at the Finance and Budget Committee level. I have attached some relevant data, which I'm happy to work through if needed, Mayor, but perhaps I'll stop here and take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I had a couple quick questions. The last time that this was adjusted was, do you remember how many years ago that was? I don't know.
I believe it was in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also, can you talk a little bit more about the structure of comparative data of our directors versus some other communities' directors, because we have combined so many our directors between the Board of Ed and, the school administration, all that combination of factors, and how sometimes it's hard to compare.
Yeah, good questions and important points. So what we've attached here under this agenda item, salary data that we've collected from the CCM survey. And CCM some years ago began to compile a survey that serves Connecticut municipalities relatively well. West Hartford is different in a couple key aspects. We're one of a handful of towns in the state where we have some shared positions with our school district. Our Human Resources Director, our Plant and Facilities Director, our IT Director, they're all supporting both entities. And interestingly, if they were school employees as opposed to town employees, their salaries would be higher than where they are now. For example, before we had the combined Department of Human Resources, the previous HR director for the school district was paid at the deputy superintendent level. So by combining the positions, both the town and the school district are saving money there. We also, here in West Hartford, we have a few department heads, directors, that are supervising more than one department. The Director of Leisure and Social Services is one good example. In many, if not most towns, you would have a Director of Parks and Recreation and a separate Director of Social Services. So just looking at the salary data alone isn't going to provide you with necessarily with an apples-to-apples comparison. There are some key distinctions here for West Hartford. Another point I meant to add at the beginning, Mayor, is the range. This is something you adjust every 3 to 5 years. This is not something you're doing on an annual basis.
And the percentage of the impact, the total of all of the salaries, and this wouldn't be a budget impact at all, but the amount that all of these salaries represent in the total budget is?
So looking at just town employees, the director's salaries total approximately $1.5 million, are 3.2% of total town salaries, not including Board of Education employees.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any questions or comments? Mr. Winograd?
I had participated in the finance meeting on the phone, which made it a little harder to follow, but I know one question I'd asked that I think that the answer had been, so in terms of the bottom, so right now, you said there's nobody, we don't have anybody who gets raised sort of automatically because the new floor would be higher than their current salary. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe the lowest salary in this group, the incumbent, is making $114, $115.
So the raising the floor has zero impact on
correct
on salaries. And then in terms of people who are at the top, it was a pretty small number, as I recall, of people who actually would get.
We have one employee at the top right now. Next year we would have a few more.
Okay. And by being at the top means simply that they have the eligibility to get a raise.
Correct.
Not that they will get one. And I understand that they're not on the same kind of scale as the bargaining unit members or other, other staff. But can you give some idea of what kind of salary rate, would be for those who haven't hit it yet? Like, what kind of raises are we talking about here?
Sure.
Even
and again,
potentially,
it's a merit review based on their performance from the previous year. And what I've awarded in my 2 years are increases of 2.5% to 3.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Ms. Fay?
Matt, you're probably not surprised by this because you and I have spoken offline quite a bit about this. At one point in my career, I was actually head of compensation and benefits, retirement pensions for a 20,000 person organization, and all the retirees. So that was recent. That was actually in 2015. So I think this is a larger conversation, to be honest with you, that we really need to have compensation philosophies, where we want people to be. So I know it's not the same as the private sector, but we would have job classifications based on what they did that were very, tightly done. And it was what they were doing, not just taking a generic one. There would be a range, and you usually want people at the midpoint of the range or 85% of the max, not to exceed, excuse me. And then when you look at compensation, you got to look at everything. You got to look at their benefits, their retirement, their contributions the town makes, the whole entire package. So salary is just one component. But I think we need to have a broader discussion about philosophy, where we want people to be. We did make the range bigger in 2015. That wasn't that long ago. At some point, people are going to exceed what the job is worth, right? You can't just keep giving them raises. So the job is worth X amount, and no matter how good you are, what your longevity is, that's the job. I think actually having a lower range is actually helpful because you could find some, whippersnapper who's maybe a junior in their career someplace else that could come in here, and you could get somebody really good with 5 or 6 years experience, at 75 or 80. So I think it's hard to make a decision on this just because we're in a situation where we've got a couple people who are bumping up. We talked about alternatives too. Perhaps these people, and this is a tool that we use quite often in various companies, that if they bumped up, we wanted to be fair, and if they were excellent performers, we would give them not a salary increase, but a one-time, payout that recognized their performance, but didn't go into the calculation for retirement benefits and other things. So I'm not comfortable with just arbitrarily changing the range since it was just recently done. I think we need a better evaluation, and I want to be fair. If people deserve to make more money, and that's what the, job range and the study behind it and job description and what they're doing says, then I think you got to treat people fairly. So I'm not looking to penalize folks, but just to come in and say I'm going to increase it to this number. I think you guys are also experiencing what we would call salary compression. I mean, your salary was public, and they're bumping up where you are. So I don't know that that's the right answer, to just keep paying the directors more. I think there's a definite worth to the job. It's something that I'm pretty experienced with doing, and I have concerns with just arbitrarily increasing the range. I think it can also set a precedent for, I don't know how many people aren't unionized in other jobs that we have, probably not many, but they could come back and say, just increase my salary range. So I don't know that it's a good compensation practice to do that. So I'm not there in supporting this right now. But I think another alternative for you would be to really look at, everybody's different, and individuals that are either flight risks. We did a full compensation analysis and who's a flight risk, who's not, and where they are, and then you can do, one-off situations to rectify their situation. So I just can't support an arbitrary plan to increase ranges. And it looks like I actually spent a lot of time with the data here. And I know they're not apples to apples. You explained that well, and it's very difficult to get that. But it wasn't compelling to me when you had the averages of some people in other towns. I know it's a difficult exercise, by the way, but comparing us to Greenwich or something like that, there's probably a premium for people living in that zip code. They could go to New York very easily. We're different. So I just think there's a lot more quantitative work that we could do to see if our people are fairly compensated. So I wouldn't support it in its form today.
Thank you, Mr. Hart.
Just want to respond to a couple points, and thank you, Counselor. I appreciate your thoughts and your experience. I think it's important when setting salaries to look at both the internal relationships as well as the external relationships, and the CCM data is helpful to some extent on the latter. Again, I think equity is a consideration, making sure that we're remaining competitive. We do have a full benefits package in place, but it has changed over time. And as we've talked about, the hybrid pension plan that we have in place, almost half of the directors are enrolled in that now. And that is a much more affordable option for the employer, for the town, which I think is an important consideration. I'll point to one position, our Director of Finance. West Hartford is the largest council manager government in the state, followed by Meriden, and then Manchester and Southington. And our director's salary does not fall in the top 10 salaries statewide. So that raises a serious equity concern for me. The largest council manager government in the state, AAA bond rating for many, many years, does fabulous work. That's the type of person we want to be able to keep, and I think it's important that we remain competitive.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, I think that the more arbitrary thing here would be to keep the salaries, to keep the range set where it is, which would, in essence, freeze the salaries of some of our top earners. And I think it's particularly relevant that Mr. Hart will continue to have discretion over whether to award increases or not. And so, in that sense, it's not arbitrary. And again, I do want to emphasize that keeping those frozen at the top of the range is, in essence, at a certain point becomes a pay cut for those workers through the magic of inflation. And so if, every year consumer prices go up, the cost of a gallon of milk goes up. And if wages are kept static, then that effectively becomes a pay decrease. So I don't view this as arbitrary. I'm happy that Mr. Hart will continue to have discretion. I do think that we need to maintain this ability in order to continue to retain and also attract the best and the brightest to West Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Oh, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. This issue is very uncomfortable for a lot of different reasons. The number one being we work with these people day in and day out, and so when you're talking about their compensation package, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. We have very talented directors. There's no doubt about that. Town manager, council. But this issue is one that's always been sort of sensitive to me. When the town manager brought up the last time this came up, I remember it well. It was my birthday. It was like my third meeting on the town council, and Ron Van Winkle at the time scolded me pretty intensely publicly because it's an issue he cared about. It was an issue I cared about at the time, and he told me that you're not going to balance the budget on the backs of 8 directors, and certainly you're not going to do that. But it speaks to an issue, an optics issue, and an overall policy issue, which is Councilor Dodge is right. The price of milk, inflation, everything goes up every year. And at the same time, our municipal tax burden goes up every year. So in the last 5 years, the average taxpayer in West Hartford over the last 5 years is paying $2,000 more than they were 5 years ago. And we know that because just go back at the meeting minutes and look at Mr. Privatera is using as average numbers, and we see that. And so, yes, that's true, Mr. Dodge. But it's also true for the taxpayers who are facing increasing tax burdens. And I think that when the taxpayer looks at this issue and they see the range, I think it gives them pause. And when we're talking about the salaries, yes, it's important to hire talented people, but the salary alone is just one of several compensation factors that our directors have. Number one is the salary. Number two is this is a great environment to work in. Number three, they have, as Mr. Hart mentioned, great benefits package. Some of them, I believe, also have the deferred comp aspect of compensation as well. And so it's an overall package that is attractive, and we know it's attractive because just in the last year, we've been able to hire 2 new directors, Chief Priest and Chief Riddick, both of whom have been welcomed into our community, who have come with very good resumes, and I think I can speak for all of us that we've been, happy with their service. We may disagree on some of their policy positions, but they're good folks doing a good job and working hard. And so to me, at this time, given what's going on in our state and our municipality, I don't think that it's the time to move and make this sort of jump. And the last time this was up, the jump was $6,000, and this time it's $15,000. So that's another issue there. So tonight I can't support this, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the director's work. I appreciate Mr. Hart. It's a tough position for you, and I understand that as well. I also appreciate the way you've laid this out and rolled this out. So that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to address, before I forget, 2 of the points that Mr. Williams just said. According to the data we were supplied at the Finance and Budget, in 2018-2019, the Department Director's salaries comparison for a police chief, the average statewide was $157,363. Our new hire is at $143,988, below the average. And on our fire chief, according to the same data pool, the town of West Hartford, according to this, that the average is $148,291, and our salary is $140,010. So below the average of this grouping. And I just want to get that on the record because that was part of the data that was provided at this meeting. And I want to talk about this meeting because this meeting was held in the past few weeks, and in attendance was Mayor Cantor, myself, Manager Hart, Pat Morawski from our Human Resources Department. And there was no member of the minority party present. And Mr. Winograd, I'm sorry, was on the telephone. And we do a lot of heavy lifting in committee. And I understand there's only 3 of you. But this matter is so important to us that it's not one that needs to be discussed at the council table. It ought to be discussed in committee. So if you couldn't make it, just say, I can't make it. Maybe somebody else from our party can make it. Can we reschedule it to a date that we could all be there? Great, that would have worked out perfect. But no, I never got the courtesy of an email saying, this date doesn't work for us. This is so important. I felt like I'm meeting with the manager, I'm meeting with the mayor, I'm meeting with the Human Resources Department, I'm taking in this data. I can't have a dialogue with my colleagues because there's no one present. That's not how this works. This works by working in committee. And you know what? Fine, you can have a conflict, you can have an emergency. Send a follow-up email saying, listen, what did you discuss? Can we do this some other time? But you know what? We have to have a plan. We need to govern. We need to move forward. We need to make decisions. And this is what we do in committee. That's when it happens. And tonight, like all our other council meetings, these are action items. That's where we are tonight. Now, let me fill you in on what we talked about during the meeting.
This is quite a lecture, man.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't you put it in context of how many we've missed? Maybe one in all of this. So I don't want to hear this.
Well,
excuse me,
Mr. David
Madam Mayor, I have the floor.
has the floor, yeah.
Thank you.
Let the lecture roll.
Yeah. God, I didn't think it was in kindergarten still.
Madam Mayor, I still have the floor, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So we were talking about why there was a need to change the range. And the manager quite succinctly brought it to our attention that it's important that we retain professional staff, that the salaries are adequate to retain personnel who have the qualities necessary to perform these functions, that we are able to recruit professionals in these particular fields to perform these jobs. And we need to be competitive because we're competing against other municipalities for these people. And our current range as it stands now hasn't been adjusted in 4 years, and it doesn't allow us to do that. And what was really, really important, which was really significant, was the data showed that in the town of West Hartford, we have a significant number of directors who perform the functions of 2 individuals employed in other municipalities, whether it be plant services, whether it be information technologies. So we're only paying a benefit package to 1 individual, where these other communities are paying 2. And in the testimony this evening, we talked about what prior salaries were. And what really, really was important is the manager has made this request. And he's making this request this evening because he needs a leadership team to execute our policies, our decisions, and the duties associated with the various departments. And he needs the proper personnel to make certain that happens. And he's telling us that there's a problem with the current range. And one only needs to look at the director of finance position, that when we went out to replace Chris Johnson, who was our previous CFO, we had a hard time getting people, and this was brought up at the meeting, getting personnel who were qualified that would accept this salary. And that testimony was provided by our Human Resources Department. Well, that's an issue because we rely very heavily upon these individuals to perform the day-to-day functions of these departments. I don't know what else I'm supposed to say, but we have a plan here this evening that the manager has put forward, adjusting the salary range. He explained why he needed to do this. And you know what? Without another plan being put forward, we ought to vote yes. Because if I don't hear another plan, there's not an alternative. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Beth, I don't know, are you, do you want to speak?
Hello?
Yes, hi. Yeah,
Oh, thank
we can hear you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I apologize. We're number 8 on the list, which is almost not on the list. 5 of them are combined, as Councilor Davidoff said, Board of Ed and Town. So, quite frankly, when you look at the numbers in terms of what we offer, we have been extremely frugal with our offerings. So what we're allowing to happen tonight by saying yes, and I will say yes, is giving the town manager the tools that he needs to continue to recruit, retain, and ask of the directors what he needs to ask. And that is, are we getting, using our people efficiently, effectively, are we getting the most out of them? So we're not saying everyone is going to get this amount. We're just saying, hey, here's a range. It's a little bit more than the range was 5 years ago. Very fair. And he will use it at his discretion. And there has to be sort of this leap of faith, this trust that we hired the town manager to do a job. He's saying, in order for me to do my job best, I need this tool. So I will give him this tool. And if anyone wants to see the numbers, it's all in black and white, which, quite frankly, was fabulous to see. So I thank to the HR who put all together all the numbers of all the towns of our average, which is for the most part we are below average for most of the towns. So I wholeheartedly support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Lawrence?
Thank you. Where to start? So I certainly take issue with the lecture that we just received from Mr. Davidoff. It's a lack of decorum and a lack of professionalism that has not been seen in this chamber since I've been on the council for 6 years. Never happened. And God knows that many of my colleagues have missed council meetings, committee meetings. Actually, May 22nd, I missed, or the last council meeting, was the first council meeting I've missed since I've been on the council, and I was away on business. And I go probably second to the mayor to the most committee meetings out of anybody on the council. So, I don't need a lecture. You have the votes. It was just gratuitous and unprofessional, and I'm shocked for someone that's been on councils for so long that you thought it would be a good idea to attack us at that level. Totally unnecessary, unprofessional, and very, very disappointing. With respect to your comments, though, and what was discussed at the meeting, and by the way, May 22nd was my anniversary and I was out to dinner with my wife, there's no issue of retainment. None. Haven't heard one. There's no issue about ability to recruit, because there's none. Because we just hired 2 folks that are happily employed and doing great work. And I should say, our directors are very good, and they do great work. And with respect to being competitive, there's no issue about that either. Your one example about Chris Johnson from 8 years ago was an issue, apparently. I wasn't on the council then. I assume you were. But that's the last time that I remember having a conversation about retainment, recruitment, being competitive with respect to our director salaries. Now, what you don't know is how these salaries, and all of you accept the salary numbers, and that's fine, but but you don't know what the package is, right? And so as my colleagues have pointed out, there are a lot of other things that go into a package. And when we looked at Mr. Van Winkle's package and we looked at Mr. Hart's offer, we all became aware of what's in a compensation package. Sometimes it can include salary, pension, deferred compensation, 401k, some defined contribution, whatever the public equivalent is, paid vacation, paid sick days, reimbursement for vacation that's unused, reimbursement for sick days that are unused up to a certain amount, car stipends, etc., etc. And so when you look at compensation, when you look at salary, that is one part of an overall package. So I submit to you, voting yes for this, you don't have enough information to be able to evaluate what if our directors are adequately compensated or not. More than half of them are in the top third of their compensation. Some are not. But the compensation package was strong enough to get them to either stay or to come and work here, because this was a community that they wanted to work in, and whatever the other factors of that package were sufficient for them to want to be here. So when we look at this compensation package, one, it's incomplete. Two, $15,000 is too much. And one thing that public sector employees enjoy is 2.5 to 3.5 or more % increases to wages every year. Well, that is something that's enjoyed in the public sector, but not in the private sector. And there are going to be a lot of people on TV that say, oh yeah, didn't get a raise last year. My raise was a heck of a lot less than 2.5 or 3.5%. I didn't get an extra $5,000 or $6,000 last year. That's what they're going to say. And when the headline is Town Council approves a $15,000 band increase for directors, there are going to be some upset people out there. So we, as much as there's cost of living increases and milk costs more, yeah, we all get it. But that doesn't mean that everybody gets 2.5 or 3.5% or more per year. They don't. That is a perk of working in the public sector. So, Mr. Davidoff, the plan that we would propose is no increase. And I think Mrs. Fay said that we would keep it where it is. That's the proposal. That is our position, to keep it as it is until a need is identified to adjust it. And so far on this record, there isn't a need to adjust it. So, didn't appreciate the lecture and your lack of professionalism, certainly unexpected from somebody, you know, of your experience. It's extremely disappointing to get lectured here tonight by you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. David.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the plan from the minority party is not to adopt the manager's recommendation. And I think the manager did due diligence. He provided data from his Human Resources Department. And your decision this evening was to disregard the opinion of the manager. That's where a no vote gets you. Now, with respect to the meeting, I'm sorry. My time is as valuable as everyone else's. And we have committee meetings for a reason. All I'm asking for, Mr. Barnes, is if you're not going to make it, if it's not a convenient time, say it's not convenient. I have a conflict. We could do it some other night, okay, so that we all could be there, so we could have the discussion around the council table in the workshop. That's how we usually conduct our business. But it's kind of awkward, and it was awkward, and you can ask Mrs. Morawski and Mr. Hart, that it was the mayor and myself having a discussion amongst ourselves without getting any input from the minority party. I would have preferred to have members of the minority party present to share the ideas, so maybe we can come up with a better plan. But if there's no one there to have the conversation with, and you're having a conversation amongst yourself, what's the point of having the meeting? That's my point.
Yeah, all right, you're beating a dead horse, Leon. I'm sorry. We did miss a meeting, okay? We did. There's 3 of us covering all this stuff, not making excuses. My absence was completely unanticipated and unplanned, and it was last minute. So I'm not going to sit here and try to justify your statement, because you're painting a picture that we blow off meetings left and right, don't do the work, don't come to the workshop. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of you taking this position. One meeting. You guys miss council meetings, so what? Life happens. I don't even start with another lecture because I'm not listening to it. So, and I think you completely disregarded what I said. I do have expertise in this. I've done this for executives. I've done this for physicians. I've done this for 20,000 people. Okay? And there is a right way to do it. I wasn't saying no. I do value our people, but you got to do the exercise correctly. And this, maybe this is all you can get, but how can you compare us to Greenwich, Westport, Fairfield, Norwalk? Stick with Greater Hartford. We're in a completely different, we price for zip code, by the way. That's how we used to do compensation. And if you're in New York City, of course it's going to be higher. I just think you disregarded what I said. I am open to doing something with the right information, with a compensation philosophy, which we don't have, looking at midpoints, looking at a whole bunch of more data. This did not prove it to me. There are many of the directors, which I do work with them all, and I respect them, and they do good work, and maybe some deserve raises. And I said, why don't we do the one-offs? Why don't we take a look at the people that really do need an adjustment? But to do it carte blanche across the board, you're asking me to rubber stamp things. Well, that's not why I joined the council. I vote with you when I think it's the right thing, and when I don't think that we have the information and the appropriate decision has to be made, and I don't feel comfortable with it, I'm going to vote no. If you want a rubber stamp, you're not going to get it from me. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Did you want to say something, Mr. Burns?
Yeah, just one final comment, or two comments. One, my understanding is that even though we weren't at the meeting, it didn't take any additional time out of your schedule, Mr. Davidoff. And I appreciate you being there, but I'm also disappointed that you didn't raise some of these issues about compensation and getting additional information and allowing this to come forward in its current form. And so, it's my guess, my assumption is that, it's on the agenda tonight because you support it and you have the 6 votes to pass it. And that's fine. We obviously have concerns about it and want more information, which we're not going to get. And this will come up before the council in another 3 or 4 years to increase this band, and maybe somebody will look back at this conversation. But it's, it's a conversation we're going to continue to have as salaries and benefits continue to increase and we struggle to keep up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Anybody else? So this is the most difficult, one of the most, the budget in totality is the most, I think, difficult decision that we make. But it's a really, really hard thing to talk about the people that you work with and the people that you value, the people that really make this town run well, their value in public. It's a very, very difficult thing. And what happens is that we put it aside and we don't talk about it so earnestly and honestly and talk about all of the factors that affect the salaries, whether it be compression or how we, or the whole benefit package. So we have work to do. There's no question we have work to do. And I think Mr. Hart has been very open with having those discussions and providing more information. But we do have an issue, and he might not talk about it up front, but there is some morality issues on our director's side. We had a system finance director that is just moved and is making more than her previous boss. And so then there's somebody at the top of their range, and there's other people approaching their range. So this is 0.4% of our whole budget. It's 0.4% of the whole budget. But I would say the impact to the budget and the directors and what they bring to the operation of this community is so phenomenally more. And I know it's simplistic to just talk about salary, but there is a whole package that Mr. Hart looks at when he is evaluating and compensating his direct reports. This is not our job to award competitive salaries. It is his job to recruit and to do that. What was important about the meeting, I think, and I think there's just pure passion and frustration on both sides. I don't think that anything was meant by it. I think you all do incredible work, and I think our team does also great work, is that we had human resources there to talk about some of the intricacies that weren't on the papers that you got. But we do have to move forward, and we can't, we do have to govern and act and do what is important. This increase does not mean that more than maybe one person will be affected this year, or even in 2 or 3 or 4 years. But I will say that with unemployment low, with our benefit packages being less competitive, it is a discussion that's happening on a national level across the country and in our state. And I receive a lot of information, and I think it's something that we should share, to talk about how hard it is to recruit people with this right skill set for director jobs. They have to have a certain amount of experience, and there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of public discussion, and it can be very, very difficult for people. So I want to continue to attract the best and the brightest. This has a very minimal tax impact on the director piece of it. There is a dynamic on how much is put on property taxpayers, and it's not a model that's going to be sustainable for a long period of time. And Matt and I have gone to talk about that, and it's a discussion that we all have to have. But this is the tool that Matt needs right now to provide some flexibility in doing what he needs to do. And to be honest, I don't want to come back in 2 years and adjust it again. I think I trust Matt. We hired him to do the work of being a manager and attract really incredible talent, which he already has done and shown us that he can do, and to manage and protect those tax dollars very, very fiercely, but to make sure that those directors, and many of them are, again, performing 2 jobs that other towns perform 1, are being rewarded and compensated fairly and justly, and again, be able to attract good people. We haven't seen a crisis, but the crisis is coming, and I think this is what we're trying to avoid. So I don't like to manage back, I like to manage forward, or to at least govern forward, not governing backwards. So with that, I think we will do a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion passes 6-3.
Madam Mayor, I move adoption of a resolution adopting the Capital Region Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan Update 2019 to 2024.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart, I think we lost our expert, but you will share what you can.
Yes, just a few quick comments. So this is a regional plan. The region receives FEMA money to prepare the plan, and all 38 CROG towns, in order to participate and benefit from the plan, the legislative body in each town needs to vote to adopt it. Why is the plan important? It helps us identify natural hazards that are likely to affect the region, and it's really a good template for staff. It's something we train to. If an event does occur, it's a very useful resource guide. And then there are occasions, if we face a very severe storm, for example, something that's declared an emergency by the state, where we might be eligible for some FEMA reimbursement monies. And following this plan, having an adopted plan in place is an essential component to make us eligible to apply for those monies. So I would recommend your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any questions for the town manager on this? No. With that, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Report. You were now to your report.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got my report here in the board doc system. In the interest of time, I would encourage you to read it at your leisure, and I'll defer to you, Mayor, for the announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. So quickly, announcements. Connecticut Summerfest 2019 is June 14, 15, 16, and 18, 8 p.m. at University of Hartford. Park to Park Walk. Friends of Fern are leading a Park to Park walk on Saturday, June 15th, beginning 7 a.m. And then the group will visit Walcott, Beachland, Kennedy, Vanderbilt, Eisenhower Parks, and end back at Fernridge Park by mid-afternoon. Japan Summer Festival will take place also on Saturday, June 15th, 12 to 5:30 in Blueback Square. The festival features powerful drumming performance, kendo, karate demonstrations. It's really a fun event. West Hartford's Make Music Day will take place on June 21st. This is an annual event. West Hartford will host 4 events at Webster Walk and Blueback Square from 4 to 9. The events are organized by the West Hartford Library. The lineup includes Nikita Waller, Harmonica Happiness, Jake Kulak, and The Lowdown, and Audio Jane. Blood Drive for American Red Cross will be held on Saturday, June 25th from 12 to 5:30 in Town Hall Auditorium, and you need to make an appointment by calling the Red Cross. 17th Annual Ferrari and Friends Corsico on Sunday, June 23rd. Will be on LaSalle Road. 17th Annual event benefiting CCMC and Make-A-Wish. More than 150 of the finest high-powered Italian sports cars, including Maseratis, Lamborghinis, Fiats, Alfa Romeos, will also be on display from 10 to 3. Playhouse on Park presents the Scottsboro Boys and has the honor of being able to share a piece of history with the community with its summer musical running from June 26th to August 4th. Nominated for a staggering 12 Tony Awards, Scottsboro Boys will have you tapping your toes. Summer Festival Dance Party. The West Hartford Library's Children's Division presents the dance party Webster at Blueback Square on June 27th, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And that's open to all. Any other announcements? Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a question for Mr. Hart, and I apologize. I was just trying to look to see if it was addressed in your report. But could you give just a brief update on the North Main Street Bridge project, in particular, where we stand with funding and progressing with that?
No, thank you, Counselor. This is an item we'll review in more detail with the Community Planning Committee next week. So at present, the state has suspended funding for multiple bridge projects across the state. I sent an email on this last week, including the North Main Street Bridge. We have contacted our delegation who's working on this issue. They're approaching DOT to see if they can free up money. We think our bridge in particular is deserving. It's old, it's dated, it's been on CONDOT's list for some period of time.
Sorry.
Mr. Sweeney?
Belabor this. Do you know if there's any other top 10 municipalities that had similar construction plans?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
Any other communities in the top 10 in population that had similar volume areas being put on hold?
I don't know, but we can check that out. I know that multiple projects across the state have been suspended.
I think it'd be a little more ammo for our folks to have an idea of what's being put on hold. I think and understanding that there is quite a bit of being put on hold, and in fact things that are being said that they are approved, they're not actually getting their bonding money. It would be something that would be great to know going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anything else? Okay. So reports from Corporation Counsel, Mr. Allaire.
I'd like to report that tomorrow West Hartford will be a better place because it will have more tasty baked goods in it as a result of your actions tonight. Otherwise, I have no formal report, and I'm really glad that we don't need an executive session tonight.
Me too. Okay, no appointments. At number 12, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. No petitions, no executive session. I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Good night.